Good morning, everyone. Good morning to you, and good morning, good afternoon to the people online. On behalf of EFSA and the Inter-URL Working Group on NGS, I would like to welcome you to the second day of the Science Meets Policy Conference, focused on EU initiatives toward large-scale use of NGS for foodborne pathogens. So before starting with the scientific session, some housekeeping messages. The conference will be recorded, and the recording will be available on the EFSA website, together with all presentations. There were questions yesterday about presentations. Will be published, available on the EFSA website shortly after the event. We will welcome also your question, your comment, contribution through Slido, and during the meeting you will see the QR code on the screen. But also for the people in the room, orally, you can ask questions directly with the microphone. The Slido functionality will be open after the round of presentation for the session 3, that will be the next, but will stay open for the entire duration of the moderated discussion, the last session that will close the conference. And some of your questions, as you have seen yesterday, will be asked to the speakers and will feed the discussion. Before starting, some highlights from yesterday. So yesterday, first we heard about the welcome speech from our executive director, explaining why we decided to organize this conference, why now. And also then from Stefano Morabito, an explanation about the main topic of this conference, but also the outcome of the previous conference that took place in September 2020, and the main blockers that we are going to discuss today, the main aim of this conference. Then there was the session regarding the current implementation of the One Health WGS approaches in the EU and in the member states. And there was a general explanation about the functionality, the aim of the EFSA CDC WGS system, and also some experience in some member states, Germany, Denmark, and Norway. And from this presentation, it's clear that from the technical point of view, some barriers have been already solved, and so we are ready to the next step to move forward. The second session was regarding interoperability, harmonization, standardization, in the contribution from the Inter-URL Working Group, and in particular showing all the guidance that have been produced by this working group regarding PT trials, regarding NGS methodology, bioinformatic tools and trainings that are available on the EFSA website of the European Reference Laboratories. And then there was a presentation regarding ontologies, international standard, to close the session with the experience of Genome Tracker. So it's clear that there is a lot of work ongoing, but still we identify some barriers that should be overcome. And today the scope is first, with the next session, to listen to the experience and in particular the perspective, the point of view of additional stakeholders, so society, industry, and finally to conclude with a moderated discussion to discuss about the blockers and then to find possible solutions that can move the data sharing forward in order to have the One Health approach operational. With this, I stop. I leave the floor to the chairs of the session 3, Dr. Stefano Morabito. Stefano is head of the European Union Reference Laboratory for E. coli at the National Institute of Health in Italy, but is also the chair of the Inter-URL Working Group on NGS. And I would like to invite you on the stage, and the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Valentina, for the kind introduction. And I would like to bring my personal good morning to all of you here and my personal welcome to all the other participants connected from all over the world. Yesterday, as Valentina told, we have been focusing on the implementation on building the capacity towards the technical aspect of the the systems that might be used to use genomic for tackle foodborne infection, while I believe that to date we are going to move towards the very center of the discussion by bringing into the arena the perspectives of the stakeholders with respect to that. And I would like also to say that this section is meant to pave the way for the following panel discussion, aiming at finding out and describe the blockers and to, pull up hints and possible ways to try and identify solution in order to come to the best system as possible for using genomics to tackle foodborne infection. So this session will be, as I said, centered on the different point of view. We will have the legal point of view and the industry point of view, as well as the perception of the member states risk manager with respect to the use of genomic data to take action when problems occur with foodborne infections, mainly outbreak, but certainly infection. So I would like to say a couple of words of housekeeping. The question time, as we did yesterday, will be run after all the presentation will be delivered, and we will have questions from here as well as questions from the Slido community. And in this sense, the Slido system will be open at the beginning of the QA session, and we remain open for the rest of also the panel session in order to give people the possibility to interact also remotely. Last but definitely not least, the importance of staying within times. Please, I will ask all the speakers to, stay within the time frame allotted to today's speech, and I will advise 5 minutes before the end of the time. So I would like to call for the first speaker of today, who is George Herringhuizen from the Netherlands. It took a lot to me to learn how to say his surname, but it seemed that we did. He will bring us the perspective of a lawyer. Please, George, the floor is yours for the next 20 minutes. Beware, I'm watching you for the time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everyone here in the room and abroad online. Thanks to the organizing committee for inviting me here. The next 20 minutes, I'll watch it closely. I will speak and update you about the recent changes in regulations on a European level, but mainly from the perspective of the member states. How do we look upon this? Important changes in the last 2 years were, first of all, in legislation, and secondly, I will talk with you about a judgment of the General Court of the EU, which is very, very recent, of this year, which, in my opinion, is of utmost importance to the questions that we have to face in the interchange of data between local, national, international levels, and might be of great importance. But before I come to that, I will get into the new regulation on cross-border health threats, which, especially for the food people, is the core regulation in Europe for the preparedness, surveillance and response on infectious disease control. And in the slipstream of that, also the regulation on the mandate of ECDC has changed extensively. So first, legislation. I'm not getting into the whole thing. This is very boring and very extensive. So a few important points in general. one can say that the role for the Union, for ECDC as a Union agency, and especially on the interface of interoperability has extended largely. What we see is that, first of all, the Union and the Member States, and the Union and the Member States themselves have to make plans and interchange these plans between Member States and the Union. Secondly, what is of importance for the interchange between food health and human health is the fact that also environmental threats have to be reported now. And thirdly, the role and capacities of ECDC to provide help and guidance towards the Member States has been extended largely. Very important is a new chapter in the regulation compared to the old decision that was formerly the ruling instrument in Europe, is that an extra chapter has been added concerning the digital interoperability, in other words to say, the organization of platforms, digital platforms, through which data can be interchanged between Member States and between ECDC and the Commission and Member States. As a final point in the general overview, the regulations has also a new chapter establishing reference laboratories, a regulation for reference laboratories in the European Union. Of course, we are talking about here about the human side of the whole perspective, and not the food side. This is the EFSA regulation that regulates that. When we zoom in the new regulation on the question of data sharing concerning pathogens, the actual core wording did not change compared to the old decision. That it is written here, so the national competent authority shall communicate the following information based on agreed indicators and standards to, and this is very important, the participating authorities of the network. And who are the participating authorities? These are the 27 competent national authorities. EEA countries can be added there, and the Commission and ECDC. Now, this has been changed, this wording, from a decision originally now into a regulation. And a regulation, you can discuss a little bit about it among lawyers, but not here. But a regulation is much stronger working than a decision. So this is actually, you can say, also part of your national law as a member state. It is direct working that. What is new in the wording is the addition of molecular pathogen data that need to be exchanged. Which exactly and so on is another thing, but the regulation now talks not only about epidemiological data, but specifically also about molecular pathogen data, which is for our discussion here, of course, of importance. Also added to that, and this must or should solve a lot of questions among member states about which data, detailed data, do we have exactly need to be interchanged between member states, ECDC and the Commission. And to decide what these detailed data are, there is an extra possibility of what we call lower legislation to be made, that through a delegated act, the Commission can decide which data exactly should be exchanged through the platform. And you can decide on this on a disease-by-disease basis and on, so in a very detailed, this delegated act, so-called, this is a fixed procedure in which also the member state talks with ECDC and the Commission. So you are invited as a member state to come into a working group. I make it very to come in a working group, talk with each other, which are the data, disease by disease, that are of importance to put in the digital platform from the member states and interchange. And then even this list of data, the first phase is that the expert of countries can convene and discuss and propose which data need to be changed. And then finally, it goes even to Parliament, this list, and to the Council to put a hammer on it and say, okay, this is what we agree upon to interchange between the competent national authorities. One underlying thing which is of importance for the audience here is that when talking about molecular pathogen data, it is, if required, for detecting and investigating serious cross-border health threats. Now, in my opinion, this means also, if you want collaborate and coordinate investigation on food health problems, you cannot do this without putting a pseudonymization code to the data that you interchange on a European level, on a national level and a European level. Without such a code, you cannot go back to, finally, to the patient dossier, finally to questionnaires to patients, where did you get this pathogen from, and so on. So a code going back for investigation is of the essence, and that is given by this word investigation that you should do together. So a code should somehow be included to go back. Now, if we conclude in between on this, the essence of this new regulation, then you could say that the discussion about which data to share with whom is closed now. If there was a discussion formally, and there was, especially with the Netherlands, my country, this discussion is closed. The list of notifiable diseases should be reported, and secondly, the detailed data can be agreed upon in lower legislation, which data to share through the digital platform. And this is not only that a member state shares it with ECDC and others cannot see what comes from a member state. If you take the law seriously here, then all the data are visible for the competent authorities in other countries. So I can see, as a Dutch competent authority, the data that my fellows in other countries have been uploaded to the system. That the list of mandatory data will be adopted through a special regulation, and this means also, and this concerns also my country in the Netherlands, that if you are not able to comply to the duty to report, then you have to make additional domestic legislation that makes it possible for you to get these data out of the community. That otherwise you cannot comply to a ruling that is now a regulation and not anymore a decision. Now, how about, and this is my next question, how about the sharing of this data under a return code, either on a national level or on the international level? There has been a lot of discussion about this, and especially in COVID time, we saw that on practically every country that could make could provide sequence data, they share this in GISA, the international database, with a pseudonymization code, so that other countries could ask for more information to the providing country. There was a lot of discussion on the European level. This is not allowed under the GDPR. It is a privacy question because pseudonymized data were supposed to be private data. That, nevertheless, we all did this together because we could not go further on. We could not use the instrument of sequence data if it was not possible to go back and get information from the originating dossiers. On this, come on. Just 2 seconds. Okay, can you help me out somehow? Oh, I can see it here. And can other people see it too? Yes. Okay, that. But you get on conclusions, so you need to go back. Okay.
Okay.
Don't look at the conclusions.
It's restored.
Here we are. I see it. Now there is the conclusions. Here is the. Okay. What is of importance that in April of this year, the General Court of the European Union, they took a verdict on in the domain of financing in Europe, but this doesn't matter. The judgment of the court was actually on the question: are duly pseudonymized data given to another party? Are they supposed to be under the GDPR? Are they supposed to be private data, or are they supposed to be anonymized data? And the court judged that if you give to another party duly pseudonymized data, so a code, and this other party cannot see this code and has no other legal means to bring back the data to a person, then this is supposed to be non-identifiable data and falls outside the GDPR. Now, this is a verdict. This is of utmost importance, both on the local level, the national level, and the international level of data exchange. That if it holds, because the General Data Protection Board of Europe, who was a party here and lost their case, they filed appeal to the European Court of Justice. And this will take, well, you never know, but something around 2 or 3 years before we get a verdict for this. But in the meantime, the legal status and the legal reality now is that duly, and this is very important, duly, correctly pseudonymized data are not personal data anymore.
It's 4 minutes.
Sorry?
It's 4 minutes left.
It is?
4 minutes left.
4 minutes left.
Yeah.
Oh dear. Are you serious? The consequences of this is now, first of all, that pending the appeal, this is the rule for the time being, that there is no suspensory effect on an appeal. Secondly, as I said, duly pseudonymized data fall outside the scope of the GDPR. This gives an enormous reduction of administrative burden, especially on the local and national level. Pseudonymized data, as a consequence, then can also be shared also outside the Union, because the GDPR is not the rule there. We have to be very, very careful with that. And this is primarily because there will be a whole new dynamics now coming on in the societal discussion around the privacy of data. This cannot, of course, not be avoided. There will be a lot of opposition. There will be a lot of pros, people supporting this. And I wouldn't be surprised that the appealing court, the Court of Justice, will receive a lot of friendly letters, as they call it, to give interpretations about consequences, blah, 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 and so on. So we have to be very careful. My strong advice is that if you share data with a pseudonymization code outside your country as a member state, put a second round or a third round of pseudonymization on it. So first you receive it inside your country from a local level, a medical dossier, whatever, towards the national authority. There should be a pseudonymization on this. And then put as a national country another pseudonymization code that you keep so that you can go back if necessary before you share it with ECDC, the other member states. That this is a very important. Secondly, a caveat is be fully aware what pseudonymization means. A lot of people very fastly assume, oh, this is pseudonymized data, and this is often not the case. You have to be very careful looking at, first of all, the set of data itself. Is the combination of data retraceable to other persons? And secondly, you should look at, are there any identification, identity elements in it that trace back to? And thirdly, if you make a combination of data sets through the pseudonymization code, and then you have to look again if the new set is really duly pseudonymized or not. So you have to be very careful in using now this so-called liberty to use the data and share it with other parties. Very fast about the sharing with third parties, because this is a very important element to a lot of member states. Now, first of all, I already indicated that the sharing of your data with other member states, and not only with EDC, but also authorities of other member states, is mandatory. Secondly, there is a special a line of regulation in the regulation which allows the union agencies to interchange data, if this is duly done, with other rapid alert system. And there is a possibility for the union to give partial access to the digital platform for third countries and international organizations. But these are always on the condition that a implementing ruling has been accepted. So as a member state, you are part of this discussion, whether it should be allowed or not, and what data could be shared with third parties. In all other circumstances, it is the member state and not the union or ECDC or EFSA who decides who receives your data. So questions from academia to ECDC, as was said yesterday, this does not change, to EFSA or ECDC. Can I get all these data? Must be referred from academia, for example, or otherwise, must be referred to the actual provider of the data. I never speak about owners of the data. This is very, very tricky, because a lot of patients will say, I am the owner of... About the appointed reference laboratory, I'm a little bit confused. I'm not sure what the law here, the regulation here actually says. I think because collaboration between national parties and international and EU reference lab is on a voluntary basis, so I assume that also the interchange of data there is on a voluntary basis and not mandatory, as it is to the member states. The conclusion, the discussion about the duty to whom and which data to report, on the human side at least, is closed, in my opinion. It is clear, it can be regulated, and every member state has to comply. And in principle, you share your data, the same data that you share on a union level, you share with the competent authorities of member states. Pseudonymous data, the status has changed now in 23, but appeal is pending, so we have to be cautious. The duly pseudonymized data fall outside the scope of the GDPR, but be careful, double pseudonymization is highly commendable, also for the trust of the public in the way you go ahead with their data. The sharing from ECDC with other international rapid alert systems is allowed after implementing Act, blah, blah, blah. Partial access to the digital network can be granted to third countries. And for the rest, it is the member state to decide on the interchange of their own data. Of course, and this is very important to both member states and academia and industry and so on, having respect for the national rulings on open science, open data exchange, and the Freedom of Information Act. With this, I'd like to close my presentation, and I thank again the organization for having me here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, George. Now it's time to swap to the industry point of view. I'm asking João Carrizo, who is a bioinformatician based at the bioMérieux, to take over the floor and entertain us for the next 20 minutes. Just to make things even clearer, you have a timer running there which changes color. First is white, then it gets to yellow, and finally to red. When it gets to yellow, you have 5 minutes left. When it gets red, jump to the conclusion, please. Okay. Thank you.
No worries. Yellow, warning, red, bad. Right? Okay, so first of all, thank you very much for the opportunity to be here today. It's very important for us as bioMérieux and personally to be here. I was asked to give the stakeholder perspective on genomic data sharing, the industry point of view. And I added by proxy because we are not actually food industry in this case, right? But what I hope to show you is why we can give you the perspective of the industry based on the work that we've been doing. So I'll talk a bit on the genomics for food safety and food quality, what we are doing in bioMérieux towards this with the food industry, several clients all over the world. What are the current challenges that we identified for genomics in the food industry based on what we are doing with our clients, and then I'll open some hypotheses for models of data sharing that are being already started to be considered by the industry in other domains, not directly on genomic data, but slowly moving towards that goal. So for the first part, this is how we see the industry from bioMérieux point of view. We have suppliers, we have the food industry customers, which is the food industry, and we have the final consumers. And it's a complex system that it starts with raw materials in the industry. We have the environment and production. The suppliers are industries themselves, right? Sometimes a supplier is also receives goods from other suppliers, and at the end, the finished product goes to the consumer. And we have questions that the clients from the industry get to us. So the thing is, they ask us, like, which of my production sites needs the most focus and support? So they have big organizations. They want to know, where should I put my resources in a timely manner? How can I better protect food from environmental contamination? Because the industry is really very concerned about contamination, because it's a loss of profit. And this is, at the end, what matters for them. How can I predict safety and quality issues from my suppliers? And also, how can I increase my product quality and safety? So recalls, as you know, are very costly for the industry. There's brand damage, and this is a huge issue. So it's in the minds of all the food industry to get the safest and best quality product ever to the market. So when we start talking about sequencing, we start to tell our customers, like, how can I use my microbiology testing to predict and prevent rather than just react? Because right now, what the industry does and what is mandated to do is positive and negative detection, some quantification in some cases, depending on the laws. And I'm talking here at global level, not just Europe. And we are asking much more when we introduce sequencing and typing. And here, at the different levels, we have things like, how can I better assess pathogen risks in my supply chains, where the problems are likely to appear? Is it in the cutting section? Is it in the post-kill step? So on and so forth. How do pathogens migrate geographically? So I'm seeing increased salmonella in my factory, but 3 months ago, in my suppliers, there was increased salmonella. Is it the same salmonella? Is it not? What are my emerging risks? How can I predict that I'll have problems 2 months from now? How can I reduce the risk of my environmental contamination? Where should I act? Where my hygiene barriers are failing? This is the concerns I have on a daily basis. And one important thing, like I mentioned, is how do I address the gap between the presence and absence testing, what we do now, and genomic epidemiology, what we are asking when they sequence and we are using strains for traceability. It is a huge gap. It's much more information and then knowing if just there's a presence or not. And remember, presence and absence testing usually doesn't need an isolate that we need for genomic epidemiology. So we also handle other questions that out of the purview of EFSA, things like resistance to biocides, temperature and pH. How are the tracts evolving? How can I control my pathogens? Or how can I reduce spoilage and increase shelf life? And this is a very important matter as well for our clients. So this is the things that they are looking for. And what we offer is this kind of services like pathogen mapping, which is basically tracing for them, the spoiler identification through metagenomics assays or target assays, and we also have custom assay design. We also have data services that allow the transition to digital readiness. As you know, and we've talked about, there's a path to go from current systems to a fully digital world where we can share data interoperably, even inside their own organizations, and also laboratory and consultancy. So we have this triad of detect, respond, but also predict and prevent. So this is what it puts, and we see ourselves in our role to help our customers to enter this world and for them to start to understand what is the added benefits that they can get by knowing more about what's happening in their factories at this level. Because right now, most of this is perceived as risk. I have data that can be linked to my factory at a very precise level. So there's a huge risk on that because also legal, and we'll discuss about this, and the whole system is not well described at this moment, let's say. So what are the current challenges for genomics in food industry? So to share data, we need to have the data. And truth be told, most industry doesn't have the data. They have some isolates in the freezers. They do testing by PCR, but they don't have data for contact tracing. So why they should get the data? What is the added advantage? It's a long track to the top, but we need to think about it. We see it, there's currently 3 challenges for genomic epidemiology in the food industry. So coming from academia myself, and yesterday we heard Eric said that sequencing costs like $20 per strain. This is not true for the industry. This is not true. So there's a very high cost per sample. I have 5 strains that I have to send to a third-party lab to sequence. It costs from 500 euros to 1,000 euros just to sequence, and they have basic bioinformatics. This is the reality in the industry. I was shocked when I moved to the field because I always said, yes, 70 euros per strain, that's what we get. Because we forget about personal costs, we forget about depreciation costs, we just think about reagent costs. But in industry, they don't have it in-house, right? They have to contract. It's costly, and if you thought, oh, we can do it in-house. Well, it's very costly and difficult to maintain trained personnel in sequencing, wet lab, and bioinformatics. And as all of you know, and have done this tracking in the last years, and in truth, there's a very long time to results. 2 to 3 weeks, best case, because we need to batch the things to start a MySeq or iSeq run. We don't do it right now. So, and if I have a product that I just produced, I have to know if it's safe or not to send to the customer. I cannot have it, many products cannot be there sitting for 2 or 3 weeks until we get the analysis back and say, oh, it's safe, and go. So it's not for everyday use. The other thing is there's low number of samples analyzed, usually just show you the piece of the puzzle. If I get 10 positives, but I can only isolate 5, I never get the full piece of the puzzle. I have these strains, but where they came from? Are they the same strains over time? Did I get it from my suppliers? Did I get it from someone that is breaking the hygiene barriers in my factory? What is going on? So low numbers sometimes don't tell the whole story. So having more data and good quality of data would allow us to get more. The other thing is, like we already discussed, current legal landscape and mode of action cause fear of litigation. So if I have the data, I have to report it, and what does it mean for me? I'm doing my best effort to have everything and know and share, but then I can have severe litigation linked to the fact that I actually went ahead and above what is required, and this has to be done. So this slide I added after yesterday's talk because the well-traveled salad that most of you talked about is also used as an example of the complexity of the food chain, right? So a single salad can contain ingredients for more than 10 countries. This was became a meme some years ago in the conference that everyone had this. And this also means the complexity of food attributions. If you have a product, it came from ingredients from 10 different countries, who is causing the outbreak? And the thing is, if you remember, in May to June 2011, the famous 0104H4 E. coli HUS outbreak that affected almost 4,000 people, 800 severe cases, and there was 200 million per week damage for the cucumber industry in Spain, because at some point someone said it's a cucumber in Spain and the strain was badly identified. So this was an example, and at the end it was sprouts that came from Egypt and the sprouts that came from a farm in Germany. This was the final investigation that got published. So the finger pointing with precise data, if it gets wrong, it's very costly to the industry. So there's the salad. So now talking about models for data sharing, what can you do? Do the industry avoid sequencing at all costs or not? Well, this is all risks versus values. If you show the value for them, what do they gain on having it? There's a chance that they will produce the data first, and then a chance they'll use the data to create safer and better food, and then there's a chance to share the data eventually if there's the added value on that. So the challenges are the things that have been talking about is fear of misuse or lack of trust, data quality, data usage. Is the quality of the data that is shared is good enough? Do I have a contamination and someone will actually link the contamination that was done in the sequencing lab to my product? Who can see the data and when to share and not to share? And like was discussed yesterday, if we share, it's like in the internet. If you put something in the internet, it's always out. You can never take it back. Someone will get it. Recalling data is near to impossible, and then comes the misuse. Also liability and legal implications, and one aspect that is very important is the time dimension. I have a link to my factory to a strain that was found in my factory 10 years ago or 15 years ago. Am I liable? What happened? Is it the same strain? We know now that the exact same strains are circulating all over the world for periods that biology tells us they shouldn't be circulating, but they are. We are finding them, things that are very similar all over time. Brand damage, this is where it is. Social media, news travel now faster than things happen. So open data sharing can cause considerable brain damage. And like the example that I referred, if the company is wrongly accused, then it's very bad. And the definition of standards that we heard Emma talk yesterday. And also what can we share and how to analyze to what level. There's ways to do, we can share as enough data just to get into the investigation, but we can keep most of the data private. So we need an alignment of incentives for all the involved parties. And a proposed solution that you usually have is a trusted third-party model. So a trusted third-party model, there are several advantages. We have the use of standardized data format and data analysis method for all the participants that are set by the third party. There's a centralization of data that allows for a bigger picture. So if several companies in the segment actually contribute in a almost anonymous way to each other, to a third party, they can get a better tracing of pathogens. The stakeholders can resolve problems internally in this consortium, identifying root cause analysis and pathogen migration between them. And there's the ease of use, because like I said, one of the barriers that was identified is the data analysis itself and the interpretation of the data. And this can give common analysis pipeline and reduces one of the main barriers in the field. And the thing is, in these models, data is visible onto you. The consortium or the group get non-identifiable data reports that has to provide added value. So what are the key principles for alignment of incentives in creation of data standards? Well, the first thing is neutrality. The third party has to be neutral. So and this is paramount to the process. One of the questions I hear is, the red one here, I'm seeing as regulatory agencies. Can a regulatory agency be considering this kind of model? Maybe, to be discussed. I think this is something that we should discuss afterwards. The purpose of transparency has to be very clear. What data are we sharing, to what goal, and what is the added value that every participant have to that. And of course, participation. We have to, this model only works with enough participation, otherwise people don't get results that are meaningful for the purpose. There are already current examples being in place of third-party models. Here, Scandinavia is leading the way with the NCS Seafood Innovation and the Global Salmon Initiative. This is not genomic data necessarily, but it goes for, it's in food, it's in food safety, food quality, and improvement of product. There's also in the US, there's the Western Growers that actually, there's an announcement that they have assigned, they have a support letter from the FDA and are working with FDA in leafy greens, because everyone knows that leafy greens are a huge issue in the US for outbreak causing due to E. coli. And there's this association of growers are actually pulling together efforts to trace the origin of the problems and pulling data together and moving slowly towards the genomic data sharing to get the results. And also the Food Industry Intelligence Network, that has a very interesting thing, that the way they solve the liability issue is data is actually submitted by lawyers. Therefore, data is protected by client lawyer privilege, and therefore they cannot be subpoenaed in that sense. So just to illustrate the complexity of this. So to conclude, genomic data, it's clear, even in our customers that we start to work, holds the promise of a food safety in a more integrated and potential global scale. But first, we have several current challenges to overcome for a more widespread use of this technology in the industry. The use of the third-party data sharing models can provide the first path, at least, to overcome current limitations and pave the way for the future. This is a bit akin on the control network, the data sharing that Mirko was talking about, in this case between two regulatory agencies. And that's it.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Joao. I believe that you and George both raised quite a few points that might need a kind of a 2 or 3 hours question and answer points. But thank you so much for that. We will make a good use of it, particularly because we are now delineating a pathway, you know, from the legal perspective to the industry perspective up to the member states risk manager perspective. And for the last point of view, we will have 2 speakers. The first one, it will be Katja Alt from the Federal Ministry of Food and Agriculture in Germany. And Katja, please, the floor is totally yours. The same goes for you with the times and, you know, with the time staff and the timers. Sorry.
Yes,
okay?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for supporting me with the coloring also. And yes, thank you for the interest and from EFSA side, from everybody's side. And I think this interest is in particular for Germany quite high, because we have had one talk yesterday and now we are able to deliver the second one. So I think this reflects a lot, and the interest is quite mutual, because I don't know if you have seen the German delegation we're here with. It's huge. I think we're 10 people from Germany, higher positions, NRL heads accompanying me. I see it that way. And this reflects, in my opinion, also the momentum we're having in Germany right now, because we're in the middle of a process that is hopefully going to change something in the landscape of outbreak investigation and detection in Germany. And it's the fact that we're trying to establish a WGS data management system cross-sectoral with the other side of the story, that is the public health side. And yeah, it's interesting, it's tiring, exhausting, but also full of enthusiasm and yeah, positive feeling that this might work out. And yeah, being here at the end of these two, sort of the end of these 2 days, I'm sure I can't really add in specific topics of problematics everybody was talking about yesterday too much to the things all of us, I think, are aware of. Everything has been said in some way. So what I'm trying to do here is to give you a little bit of a story of what is happening in Germany right now. And to start, I would like to delineate a bit what is going to be my talk about and what it's not going to be about. So I'll try to not be that repetitive to the part that was already said yesterday, with perhaps some exceptions that are just important for my presentation today. So the bioinformatics aspects that were presented yesterday in Burkhardt's talk would not be content of my presentation today. I will try to focus a little bit more on the logic progression of this activity in Germany. So the steps taken so far and why we are here and where we are, what we have found out a little bit. I will not be able, due to time, to go too much into detail, but just to give you a rough idea what we have found out so far. And if you're interested, of course, you can always approach me in the breaks, and after the presentation, you will get my contacts. Keep in mind, this is told from the food safety perspective. I'm a vet, and I'm working for the Agriculture Ministry at federal level. So this is not going to be about the public health part, although it represents perhaps more than half of what is important of the project. So the public health is not addressed here, the public health part, so keep that in mind. And also a difference to the scope of this whole frame here is that we're trying to set up a system in Germany that is intended to be for continuous alignment of sequences. So not only for the part of outbreak investigation, but also more for the detection part. So the preventive aspect is very great here. And then at the end, I will try to talk to you about what we plan to do next. And I hope that in this journey, this will be more of a story. So I'll jump in the timeline somewhere like in the middle of it. This is not the beginning, but the middle of the activity. What you can see here is a chart that you already saw yesterday in some different way. We have this operational structure in our initiative that is composed by 3 working groups. In the center, you can see an overarching, if you will, a higher level federal state working group that is more composed by people from the management side, decision makers, from the lender, and also from national level. And these guys have like the responsibility, and hopefully they will endorse a document that is called a target concept, that is to be seen as some sort of guide to implement a system in the future. The target concept is fed by results that derive from 2 sub-working groups that roughly separated deal with aspects of bioinformatics and databases and interfaces, and were described yesterday mainly by Burkhardt. And the second group is more dedicated, that is sub-working group 2 in green here, more dedicated to aspects of communication and coordination. So the people working in the second group are more deriving from the epidemiology part and are experienced outbreak investigators that deliver more to the aspects of communication. To ensure that we have the interests of the federal states and of both sectors included and well represented in these groups, we have installed leaders in each of the working groups, leaders from the lender who represent both sectors. And these leaders, together with me, who is some sort of project management office, We are facilitating the meetings, preparing the meetings, facilitating them, but we also effectively act as a sort of authoring team for the generation of the target concept, this document I was talking about. So this looks nice, but as many things, it didn't happen overnight. So I'm switching now in the timeline like a little bit more to the beginning. What were the steps that led to this point of delivering such a nice structure? So we talked about that yesterday a lot, and it's a combination of evidence of the benefits of WGS for food break investigations and detection of those, but also the affordability of the method so far that has led to the situation in Germany where we have this technology broadly implemented in both sectors in the laboratory part. So we have at federal and at regional level laboratories already working on a routine basis with the technology. The distribution in both sectors is not equal, but what is common to both is the increasing trend in the use of the implementation of the technology. And of course we had, remember times before COVID and other epidemics we were having, so we had those kinds of outbreaks exerting political pressure just before COVID, major outbreaks costing lives and economic losses, who led, of course, also to the situation we are now facing. But there is a major trigger in this that really broke the routine we were facing a couple of years ago, and it's something that I was preparing a lot on how to phrase it here, and was very nicely said yesterday by our colleague from the regional authorities in Italy, that we have this discrepancy between a method that evolved, generated a lot of data, and people are really, responsible people, the ones who are enforcing the law, are really like a little bit left behind of what to do with all this data. And this situation is what we have in Germany. So we have a method that delivers information, and the part that comes next to put this information into action is not really connected. It's connected, but in a very historically grown way, if you want to. So the good cooperation that we have between responsibles, we have had for many years, dates back to a time before WGS. So they try to accommodate, to adapt their ways of cooperating around the method, and the targeted agreement that leads to agreed actions upon this method is a little bit left behind. So we're in a situation where a bit more targeting, a bit more directing, and a bit more bringing up agreements between the people involved in using this information is there, and could be of benefit for the situation. And there we have also the thing that has to do with us and the Ministry of Agriculture. We have our national reference labs from the food safety side acting outside their actual responsibilities and mandates, because the communication part and coordination part derived from all this information deriving from NGS and WGS is a huge amount of work. It's a huge, it's also a gap between the effort put by responsibles in acting outside the responsibilities that leads to uncomfortable situations and a lot of frustration. So this is not a satisfying point of time we were at before starting this this activity. And then there was a sort of official act that was that we were approached by the federal lender and the bodies from the food safety side, and they sought our help at the federal level and the ministry, and asked us to approach the Ministry of Health, our partners in public health, and to attempt a common solution for this situation, a solution in agreement with the invested parties. So that's what we did. That was in 2021 at the end, and in 2022 we approached our partners from the Ministry of Health and used the year for a lot of talking and discussing and bringing the mindsets of both sides together to agree on, well, what is really important for us at federal level, and how do we think we could help the lender to implement a system that is useful for both sides, at the lender level and also at the federal level. So we had our first major output at the end of 2022 in a form of a comprehensive document that was developed in agreement with both ministries. And this document describes the state of play on the use of WGS, and it's intended to be an information part of the document. This part is informative. It's written in German so that everybody can understand it in Germany. And also the second part of the document is to give some sort of rationale why at federal level this is seen as a situation where we have to change things. And it gives suggestions on a structure that could be used to restructure the actual procedures we have in Germany. So there the chart comes again. This is how it happened. It is the result of intensive discussions and documented work. And what you haven't seen so far is that this written document contains also some key aspects seen from the federal level that we suggest to the lender would be important when approaching such a system in the future, which is the use, for example, for open source, the preference of open source-based software, and the harmonization of a system with the higher level behind the country. So the steps that led us so far also included then a kickoff meeting in the beginning of February, and that we used with all 60 participants from the states to introduce to each other. Both sectors came together, we introduced the leaders, and we presented our intended work plan for 2023, which was quite crowded. And we thought that we would be able to perform 3 meetings per each sub-working group and 2 meetings at the higher level group in 2023, and then trying to deliver the paper, this target concept, after 1 year. And what we have done so far is we met twice in April, twice in July with the sub-working groups, which translates to a lot of discussion, lots of preparation, lots of work, and to be honest, also into some sort of roller coaster between fatigue and enthusiasm. But what we also saw in the beginning of this work is that the resources are quite limited to, like prepare protocols and the whole work that comes in alignment of protocols after the meeting. So we decided to be a bit more flexible and agile, and jumped into the drafting of the target concept right from the beginning, which is like a little bit more software development-based working approach. And what we have so far is a first rough draft of this target concept that includes a lot of results. And this is a picture of our kickoff meeting in Berlin. That is just to show you some of the more of part of the excitement part of the story. Lots of people coming together and watching at screens and listening and discussing. This is part of the beautiful part of the story in Germany. And yeah, just to be very brief on some topics we have covered so far and the related difficulties we have found, and possible solutions are already written down in this first draft of the target concept. As for the technical parts, I leave it to what you saw yesterday. For the information and reporting channels, this is a very interesting part and addresses very much my personal interest in this working group, because I worked for years with data. And information and reporting of data is a really interesting part of the whole thing. And again, this goes back to this historically evolved situation that we have, where people were used to communicate and report in a certain way before WGS, and are now some sort of overrun by this information deriving from the method. So we used to have guidelines that don't account actually for WGS, that are of course outdated therefore. And we have a higher sensitivity in a method that is delivering like sort of too much information. So we have to adapt to that fact in some way. So what we have found so far is that we see a possible solution in doing a lot of automation in the reporting as much as possible. This is also evidence-based. It's been brought up by running projects that have delivered this result. And we think that not only the automation, but the prioritization of investigations is also key in this. And for this, metadata come into a very important, to playing a very important role. And, but then of course, you have the problem with the data protection. So this is kind of a circle of chances, opportunities, but at the same moment you have to account for the setbacks that are in those chances. So what we have proposed is of course the revision of guidelines, but then to try a system that uses metadata for different purposes. But that of course requires to be very clear about who is using what at what time point in both sectors. You have to remember we have both sectors and different administrative levels involved. But metadata are crucial for the effective investigation of outbreaks. So this is something we are putting a lot of effort in developing. A role-based system with access rights could help here a lot, and access to metadata according to dynamics, and defining those time points in the release of metadata for the players in outbreak investigation and detection is crucial. So what we're planning next? As I said, we met twice with each working group this year. We have prepared a draft. We have led a lot of discussions and conversations. So we think that from this bottom to top approach, we are at the time point where we have to approach the top. So from the sub-working groups came the necessity to approach the higher level working group. So we are preparing a presentation and a discussion with those guys from this center group in the end of November probably, and we will prepare that presentation extracting the points that need most discussion and decide hopefully on those aspects in upcoming November. And then beyond discussion, there is, of course, the need to continue work aligning the draft of the target concept, but also continue work on the proposals we have already started. And hopefully my really big goal is to start with a real minimum requirements set for setting up the system next year, perhaps in the beginning, or yeah. If I'm too hopeful at the end of this year, let's see what happens. Yeah, and with that, I'd like to conclude, but not without expressing my immense gratitude to all these people accompanying me through this journey. This has been like the most exciting 16 months in my career, because it's like, you know, everybody's staring at you from all sides, and I'm still confident that this will work and change the situation in Germany at some point. So thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Katja. Now it's time to, to swap to the last speaker for this session, who is Koen van der Weijden from the NVWA, which is the Netherlands Food and Consumer Product Safety Authority. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Stefano, and thanks again also for inviting me to give a little bit of an overview of what's happening in the Netherlands. The situation in the Netherlands is in many ways very different from, for instance, what we've just heard from Germany. As with the talk from Denmark yesterday, the size of the Netherlands is roughly the size of one of the Länder in Germany, which totally takes away one of the layers of complexity that was just now discussed. It makes it much easier, in a sense, to proceed on this topic. And I will show you what we have done here in the Netherlands. My focus will then not mainly be on, let's say, the organizational part, but more on the data sharing itself. So if we look in the Netherlands, we've got a couple of stakeholders there that are part of this process. And the major players that are working in this field are the Public Health Institute, the RIVM, and also Wageningen Food Safety Research, which is the Food Safety Institute in the Netherlands. And each of them do analysis on WGS on isolates that they obtain either from the human domain or from the food domain. And the food isolates that the Food Safety Institute gets, they get it from the Food Safety Authority that does their national plan. So these are all, let's say, governmental type of samples that have been obtained. And what both of these institutes do is that they share periodically the FASTQ files, so basically the raw data that comes from these type of analysis. So both have the same data set from both the human side and the food side, but also only on a very limited metadata level. So they have the FASTQ files, but they have very limited else. The only thing that they know from the food side is that the other isolates come from the human domain and the other way around. But nothing is shared on which type of companies or these type of things. This is not shared between the two. What then happens is that each of them, from this shared database, they do their cluster analysis. So basically, you get independent results on the same data set, on the same raw data set. And what happens then is that they each report independently towards the Food Safety Authority, the NVWA in the Netherlands, and then the NVWA, as a risk manager, then communicates with the food business operators involved on if there is an outbreak, how to take the next step and do the risk management actions. So this can be communication, obviously, to make sure that the food business operator knows what's going on, and also to perform controls and wherever needed, enforcement. Well, if you then look at the results of this highly overview of this system that I just now described, which has been implemented effectively in the Netherlands starting 2019. So if we look prior to 2019, in the Netherlands, no listeriosis outbreak was ever solved. Actually, no listeriosis outbreak was actually identified. And this is mainly due to all kinds of difficulties, but especially determining epidemiological relatedness. It's very difficult to show from an individual patient if it is connected to another patient. And I will not delve into the details of that. You can ask the public health colleagues who are also present here. But from 2019 onwards, we really started to see tangible results from the system that was set in motion. And from then onwards, we had multiple listeriosis outbreaks identified, so in the human domain, and also solved yearly. So basically, this means that it is identified which food source was probably the source of the outbreak. And also we were able to identify with additional controls to see if this is indeed was the source and how to remove the source and to be able to limit further illnesses. So our conclusion is that WGS and data sharing has been key starting 2019 to identify outbreaks and to do controls at suspected food sources and production facilities. And the link that I've provided in the presentation, and you will get the presentation later, gives an overview of a paper describing the results that we had in the early years starting 2019, but also prior to that, because there have been some data from earlier years also been looked upon and checked whether clusters we have missed prior to 2019. So that's in that paper. So what are elements that we have identified that will lead to effective sharing of data in the Netherlands? As mentioned, and it's not specifically in this slide, but there is a layer, a layer of complexity that we have less compared to Germany, for instance, because we do not have this layer of complexity with Länder. We are a land by itself, one could say. Although actually in the human domain it's slightly different, because in the human domain we've got more municipality type or regional type of services that are in between the Public Health Institute and the actual patient. So that is another layer of complexity. But we do not have that on the food side. So that is much easier because that's really centrally organized. What we do see is that what is important, at least in our view, is that you have to assign clearly responsibilities and budget according to the zoonosis directive. Because in the zoonosis directive on the food side, you see where it is denoted what the responsibilities are for both the food business operators and also the member states when it comes to investigating foodborne outbreaks. And especially this is mentioned in Article 8, that the competent authority shall investigate foodborne outbreaks in cooperation with the authorities referred to, and then there is a reference towards, for instance, the public health institutes. And the way we implemented that in the Netherlands with regard to foodborne outbreaks is really a bottom-up approach. So this actually happened prior to 2019, prior to whole genome sequencing, to see what is needed to be able to get the communication in such a way that you can actively investigate these type of foodborne outbreaks. And when it comes to whole genome sequencing, what we saw that it was very, it helped a lot that both the Food Institute and the Public Health Institute independently developed the cluster analysis pipelines. So that gave them their own responsibility and their own expertise. They built up their own expertise, and in a way they could validate each other to see if they were on the right track. Do they get the same results? And up till now, we've seen, a couple of details, but in essence, we get the same results. We also have made agreements on very limited sharing of data, of metadata. So basically, as I mentioned, there's the FASTQ files. There is, they know from the food side that this is human data that they will getting, or actually isolates from humans. It's not human data per se. And the other way around, you get the food isolate data, but not about which company and these type of things. And again, from now on, still, there is, both institutes, it is allowed to have independent development of their expertise and the validation thereof, and also to make public, the papers because of that. But they need each other if they want to use data from each other, because they have only very limited data from the other side. So if you want to use data from the other side, you need to have context there to be able to do that. And that promotes cooperation, for instance, on scientific exposure. I still have a lot of time. This is good. But then we're just talking about governmental data. So data that comes from either the human side or from the food side. But what about other types of data? And we've discussed this also. We've touched upon the topic already a little bit. For instance, the food businesses. And we had in 2019, especially a couple of whole genome sequence related outbreaks that were solved by whole genome sequencing essentially, that attracted a lot of attention from food businesses. And from that point on, some affected food businesses and some frontrunners show limited use of whole genome sequencing, because they understood the potential also for their own processes. Do I have a persistent strain in my process, for instance? It is, as mentioned also in the prior talk this morning, it is relatively expensive for them. They do not have the knowledge yet on how to use it, although some other parties can help them with that. And we have had actually from the competent authority side, we have had several requests for the possibility to query the database that we have. So that they can take their FASTQ data and see if they have a cluster with any of the data in the database. And they have asked not so much to put in their data in the database, but just to have a see if there is a connection. Because putting data in there, well, as you can imagine, this is seen as some risk for exposure. So can we do this anonymously? And we're actually looking into that. So I think from the Genome Tracker talk yesterday, we understood in the US there is a similar system that you can do this in a somewhat anonymous way. And in that sense, at least be able to see if there are some isolates out there that your isolates are connected to in some way. But there are also other stakeholders in the field of other institutes that do whole genome sequencing. So academic groups, commercial labs, or other non-governmental institutes. And how do we deal with that? And that's not very easy. If we're looking at it from the legal side, it's not easy to do, but we do have some possibility with national legislation to commandeer food results, but it has to be connected to the food system. It requires some substantiation, so you cannot do this during routine analysis or routine controls. But if it is connected to an outbreak investigation, this becomes much easier. But it can be done. Well, I will then go to some of the potential hurdles towards proactive sharing, because what I've described up to now is more like reactive sharing. There is an outbreak, or you do have some incentive to be able to obtain the data, either from, let's say, the governmental samples that have been distributed, which is more proactive in a sense, but from the outside, the FBOs or other types of organizations, that's more a reactive part, what we're doing. And the thing is, for both the food business operators and the other types of players out there, they will be thinking, as also mentioned by João, is what's in it for me? And do the gains then outweigh the cost? And generally, especially with food business operators, they only see the costs. And not only the costs in financial terms, but also in, let's say, reputational loss. If you're the first company to do this, you're most likely also to be the first company to be able to be in the spotlight in that sense, and not always in a positive way. And do then your suppliers, because you're also taking isolates from your suppliers, or maybe the businesses that you're selling to, are they enthusiastic that you're doing this? This is a bit of a risk. And one of the questions, again, as asked, what can others do with the data? If it's already out there, as João mentioned, what is happening with it? And you cannot take it back, and then suddenly, you've got some risk on your hand. So this is the things that we hear. We currently do not have an answer to that. So how can we provide these potential players with, again, so that they will accept and that they will be enthusiastic to do this? We do not have an answer to that. And if we look into food businesses specifically, as mentioned, the large financial and reputational consequences can be really, really large. We've had a couple of outbreaks where the food businesses have lost millions and millions of euros just on the outbreak alone. And then if you want to sell your product again to some of your customers, they will say, well, you've been part of an outbreak, so we're not sure if we trust you on that. Well, generally, in our opinion, what we see is that these are the companies that then take a couple of steps forward and actually are becoming better performers than their peers generally. So I would only say to most of the retailers, buy with somebody who has had an outbreak, not too recently, but at least buy there, because generally those are the front runners. But anyhow. And I think one of the questions that is generally asked is how do we as a company, how can we proceed with this? And one of the questions that are asked back is, well, do you want to know early if you have a problem? Or do you want to have the competent authority tell you that you have a problem? And obviously, generally, it will be the first. So at least I say, well, if you are interested in whole genome sequencing, try it out, do it. At least know yourself if you've got a resident bacterium or other type of pathogen in your facility, which you are not able to eradicate sufficiently. If that's the case, at least you know what to do, to give some more attention to that specific pathogen, be it Listeria, Salmonella, or whatever. But still, although they will not say it directly to us, but in basically that's what we see is that companies react with ignorance is bliss. If they don't know, then they probably don't have a problem. And obviously this is a matrix type of situation, and the one will take the red pill, the other will take the blue pill. But and this is also something that I want to conclude with. João mentioned that they work with a lot of companies that are interested in this, and these are generally the large companies, the multinationals, the ones that make large products, which are generally lower risk. The higher risk products are generally made by smaller companies, at least in the Netherlands. And they do not have a lot of confidence in this. They do not have a lot of knowledge in this. And they expect also that the society does not understand that the risk is always there. Because society generally tends to think that we can have zero risk when it comes to food safety. But zero risk does not exist in food safety. So there will be, if you buy something like a meat product that can be eaten raw, like maybe filet américain, if you know something like that, or steak tartare, well, you know that there will be, if you eat it a lot, there will be a small chance perhaps, but there will be a chance that at some point there will be a salmonella in there or something else. And it's not, it's maybe also part of, maybe also this community to also, inform the public in that sense, that things can go wrong and that we should not hang each company where something goes wrong. And the companies then maybe have some more confidence to be able to also to share that not everything goes right and that when they find something, at least they can take action and they now need not be in a more of a denial mode. But I think that's also an additional layer of complexity that's part of this, that we also should recognize, also from, well, each stakeholder that is part of this process. And I would like to stop with that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Koen. Really an inspiring talk. I mean, you also have highlighted, together with the other speakers, a lot of discussion point, which I'm pretty sure will ignite a very interesting discussion. And to this purpose, I would like to ask all the speakers to join me on the stage, but not until the chairs are brought on the stage for the, they're coming, for the question, for the QA session. I guess the Slido has been open right now so that we can hear the voice of the Slido community as well. No, that's enough. Please take a chair. Thank you. Let me say once again, thank you to all of you. You have been able to give a very comprehensive picture on how complex it might get to make use of the data. Until yesterday, I was convinced the most complicated part of the story was producing data. Was related with bioinformatics, with IT infrastructure, and ontologies and protocol for data sharing and whatever. But I'm afraid that I was totally wrong, because the real complexity probably starts afterwards. Once you collect the data, once you use the data, and once you are supposed to take actions based on the data. And this is exactly the main point of this QA session, which is officially open right now. And I would like to give the floor to the audience. There's one here. Please say your name.
Thank you. Nico van Belsen, Science Consult. Thanks for the excellent presentations. As already explained by some of the speakers, there are quite some hurdles to food industry to start using WGS. And my question to the risk managers in the panel is, do you foresee in the future any carrots or sticks to make it more interesting for food industry to start doing it? And of course, I would also like the milieu perspective on that, but in the end, it would be a risk manager decision, I think, to do this. Thank you.
Yeah. Who wants to start with it?
Well, yeah, sure. I would like to answer that. Although I must say that we will have a panel discussion where we will elaborate a lot more on this. But obviously, also already in current legislation, at least there are some incentives that that can be read, that at least can be useful for food businesses. But that's more on the stick side, so to speak. So as mentioned on the carrot side, knowing if you have a persistent pathogen in your facility is very helpful, at least to show that or to take action upon. So review some cleaning procedures, these type of things, knowing at least that if the, for instance, if I take Listeria as a starting point, that it does not come only from, let's say, the raw materials that you're sourcing, but that there can be something inside of your factory that you still need to manage better yourself. I think that should be a huge incentive. But it's still difficult, given all the difficulties that were mentioned. Yeah.
Any more reaction from the other speakers on this? Yep.
Yeah, perhaps just the status quo in Germany. So far, no sticks nor carrots, but I'm very inspired because I'm here also to get feedback and learn from systems that are ahead, for example, in the Netherlands, and I'm very inspired of this principle of just opening your database to querying for the industry. And so we're starting very pragmatically in Germany right now. We only have the 3 pathogens and only the official side, but this is a very, this inspiring idea I'm taking with me as the project manager.
Well, like Nico said, from Biomerio's side, we are not risk managers, but therefore we can only work on the carrot side. And what we try to provide our customers is actually show them what is the added benefit for them to do it for themselves. Where's the value on that? Do they gain in knowledge? And the thing is, it has been a process, and as soon as they identify the gains by preventing future outbreaks or future problems, they understand it's a huge carrot.
Okay, I'd like to pull one more question from the audience, Stefano, and then...
Stefano Pongolini from Italy. A legal question. In your experience, what's today the legal value of WGS scientific or technical evidence in a court? Is there jurisprudence about this? Are there significant differences across different areas in the world or inside Europe? Because legal systems are different in different countries, for example.
Thank you for the... It works?
Yeah, it does.
Thank you for the question. If I am in court 5 years ago, 10 years ago, and there is a question at hand whether there is a causality between a patient's damage and a certain product, we could always say, well, we have a low or middle certainty percentage that this causes due to the epidemiological circumstances, blah, blah, blah. Now, these days, most judges, let me say, a lot of judges do not understand what sequencing is and so on. That is very difficult to explain. But if they understand too that the causality is much higher, with the certainty about causality is much higher, and that it depends on the actual comparison of the 2 sequences and the small difference that are there, whether it is, although when I'm there as an expert witness, I always explain that it is never 100% certain that the one causes the other. There can always be something in between, and so without epidemiological evidence, until now, as far as I know, only sequencing never has a direct consequence concerning claims. Last point about this, claims is something, the culture of claims and what has been rewarded by judges and so on is very, very different in various countries. So some countries have a very high claim culture with a lot of money going on it, and you have a lot of lawyers who are earning a lot of money about this and so on. And in other countries, everybody knows, including the judges, they are very conservative here, and they say, shit happens. So everybody bears a little bit of the shit, and this is more the case in my country.
Yeah, maybe if I can add to that, because in the Netherlands we actually had a couple of court cases where this was brought to the judge. And as George mentioned, our response or our defense in a sense is that the WGS data is not used as only to describe that a certain producer was the source of an outbreak. We needed a lot more data. Epidemiological, not so much from the human side actually, but more from the food side. So to be able to show that it is not only the isolate that is present both maybe in the production facility, on the food, and also in the patients, but also that there were problems with the controls that the food business was performing. For instance, in cleaning or other types of things that shows that transmission from this company towards the consumer was not only possible, but very probable even. And so, as mentioned, WGS is not the only thing. You need more than that. And I can tell that in both cases that we mentioned, we were able to successfully defend this case.
Yeah. There was a question from the back of the audience. Yeah, down there. Before giving the floor to the Slido community, please.
Hello, thank you for the presentation, first of all. So my name is Tatiani, I'm from the European Association of Chemical Distributors, and our members deal a lot with the food and feed distribution and everything. So this is maybe a bilateral perspective on data sharing, but I was wondering, maybe you are aware of the digital product passport that is happening now. And I was wondering if you see that this would help tracking possible contamination throughout the value chain, and if this will help then to see in which part of the value chain this contamination happened. And then from an industry perspective, do you see the benefits of these, or what are the challenges that are seen? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think that will be a very important instrument, right? When we reach to the digitalization step that I told that we can reach to get to the point that we actually have the digital passport. I think that will be instrumental in being able to track things through the food chain and find more correlation. It's akin to the ontology level that Emma said, that we can really track things and really trace things. I think there's still a long path to get there, especially because, like we were talking about, there's large industries, large groups, large consortia that even then they will have their own challenges to set it up due to the size, and smaller ones because it needs much more new knowledge to do. It is probably one path forward to do it, and will allow that. And then we have to connect to find out how can we connect the genomic data to that digital passport. So,
thank you. I think it's a nice point. I mean, and even though it opens the way to another very complicated field.
Oh, definitely. So again, the industry has to see what's the added value for themselves of using the mechanism.
Yeah.
Right. So otherwise, it's only cost and no revenue.
As always, the balance is to be found.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. Maybe we could give the voice to the Slido community. Do we have any contribution from them?
Yeah, we do have many questions, and one of these is addressed to the managers and perhaps to Katja. So how we could facilitate data exchange and availability from private sector, particularly laboratories and food industries?
Yeah, that relates a little bit to what we said before. We're starting more from the official side, including official samples and official sequences in our project. But yeah, we have been already approached by the industry, by private labs, and there is perhaps one field, one very specific field, and that is the salmonella control plants, and the sequences derived of those isolates that is really more intrinsical to our project, and that is one part that is actually in the hands of the private industry, because salmonella isolates derived from poultry holdings are isolated in the private sector. And this is one very specific target where we're thinking about including that in our project, and then we would have to approach the labs. But we already have the connection to them, so it's like a question more of when will the time be good to go into that.
If I may, perhaps we have a question for João. So you mentioned the possibility of the regulator being part of the third-party models. Can you expand your views on this, please?
So again, it's the question of trust. In these kind of models, we need to have a trust between all this. And I think there's a view that we could even have the regulators as a part of these neutral mechanisms. If there's a trust, there's no implication on no liability that can be pulled all of a sudden out of a hat from the regulator. So with the right legal framework and the right way to do it, I don't see why not the regulator cannot be part of these trusted-party models, but only with this trust built between the whole system.
Yeah, maybe if I can add to that, because that is indeed a very difficult discussion, because trust, as seen by most of the food business operator, means that the competent authority is not taking action. And obviously this cannot be the case, because if we do see a non-compliance, if we do have to investigate on foodborne outbreaks and we do identify the source, we have to take action. Actually, the food business has to take action. And if it isn't on a sufficient level, then we have to take action. And generally what we see in these type of discussions is that what the food business operator wants is that we do not take action. And obviously, yeah, this is not something that, this is not our role. So it is very difficult from each point of the role that you have, to get to a good conclusion. And the final outcome generally is that the food business operator says, well, then we do not participate. So that's a difficulty.
I think you have to take in perspective also what the public thinks of it. And if they say, well, you're participating, sorry guys, this cannot be, that you're already corrupted in this way, so I don't trust the whole system. And this is, of course, also a very, very important part. It's all behavioral psychology, I think.
Exactly. Like you said, the technical part is actually the easy part.
Yeah.
The behavioral part is, and the perception part is what's matter. So first, I think we need to create the trusted part that is perceived as trusted, and eventually expand the circle of trust. So thank you very much for the support on this.
Perhaps a little
Katja, please in the mic.
Perhaps a little bit to expand on the topic of building trust. I think, and we were talking about that with the guys yesterday in the evening, this whole talking about building trust, and trust is a word that is, for me, huge and so fuzzy also at the same time. So I think you have to come up with specific examples and specific targets. So this is why I come back to the salmonella thing with the poultry industry, that perhaps it's a good advice to start focusing on something that you could actually tackle, approach, and start with a good example. And if that works out, move on to the next thing. Because I think building trust like everywhere and for everyone, just based on the method, is not going to work, because the method is applied in different areas and delivers different opportunities to act upon the information derived from that. So I think you have to be, you have to target actually, specific situations and not just trust in general.
Yeah, I mean, I think that this is a very important point. I mean, yesterday in the opening of this conference, I cited touched a bit the objectives, and one of these objectives was to track the action points that might be part of a roadmap. To bring the whole system to a level of usability which might be acceptable not just for the authorities, but also for the food industry and the civil society as well. And I think that probably we have right now identified one of the main action points. I mean, we need to build trust. Of course, it's a huge term. And probably nobody knows exactly how to do that. But at least we have delineated some of the boundaries of the action to be undertaken in order to get into the playground with that. So probably that could be, just to throw a stone in the water, maybe the topic of the next Science Meets Policy Conference, why not? So I think that you guys are doing really a great job. But I would like to take the occasion of pulling up, one more from the audience. Magnus, do you have a mic?
I think so, yes.
Great.
Magnus Simonsson from the URL for foodborne viruses. I was thinking about human isolates and especially for Netherlands, as you have developed a private insurance system in healthcare. Do this in any way change the possibility to have isolates from the healthcare?
No, I don't see, and I cannot recall any cases where I can say there was an interference with private healthcare insurance and getting isolates. I should refer to colleagues who are here in the room also, who are actually working in the lab, and to be sure. If you, it's a question that astounds me. I never thought of it really. No, I cannot see a connection between private healthcare insurance and the provision of isolates. No.
Good, thank you.
Okay, so we have some 3 minutes left. So are there any more questions from the audience here, or maybe from the Slido community?
Yeah, we do. We do have a question for George again. So based on what you said, can we assume that from now on, member states must submit molecular surveillance data to ECDC?
Because it's simply in the law. The regulation says that in the network, a member state should share with the members of the all members of the network certain data, and these data will be defined as for every part of the network authorities the same. So it's mandatory to share my data with my other member states and ECDC and with the Commission. And I know that under the decision it was the same wording, and there are a lot of countries who say, well, I want only to see my own data, and I do not allow it, and I allow them to ECDC to see, but to other countries only in a generic way or something like that. But if you stick to the letter and intention of the law, it says that you inform your colleagues in other authorities in other states about the data that are supposed to be important.
We do have one on cluster detection. So on the problem of having cluster detected more easily, but clusters are not outbreaks, how can we operationalize cluster detection?
That's a good point.
Well, I think one of the assumptions inside the question is, how do you then come from a cluster and then identify maybe this single isolate from, let's say, the food side, that this is also the source, which we have also discussed. The cluster detection is only, let's say, a representation of how do the isolates compare to each other. But it doesn't state anything on what is the source? So if you have only one food isolate, you may be thinking, oh, so this food must be the source. And we have seen cases where this is not the case. So you would also need additional information. So a cluster is not, as also mentioned by George, is not the cause. It's not looking for causality. And that's an important aspect always to remember. Also, especially from the point of view from the situation that we are in as risk managers, because you go to a company and the situation or the consequences can be really large. You can close a facility and it can cost them millions. So you really have to be sure that this isolate that you obtained from a product from them, that actually this is the source as well, this company. If it's not, then you have to move on and find the actual source.
Right.
So I think that is part of the question, I think.
Yeah.
To add to that, and there were questions about what are the benefits for companies. Now, in these situations, the other way around, it is true. You can exclude a certain production line. You cannot say it is the cause of it, then you need additional information. But with genome sequencing, you can exclude a certain line. So some companies are very happy then to know, okay, I'm not the cause of it, that's for sure. So we can go on. And this is a very, very, I think, positive incentive for industrial partners to okay, you have your doubts, but I'm a positive thinker.
To a certain extent, at least.
Generally, also the glass half full anyway. But in this case, I tend to not agree. And that's mainly because if a company does nothing, it's the same result. So then they can just wait. And if then the competent authority comes by and say, well, we do have an isolate which comes from your facility, it's the same situation if you have done the whole genome sequencing yourself or not. So I don't think this is something that would be a huge benefit for a company generally. Although I do see that sequencing the isolates from your own facility has a huge benefit, but not so much this case.
I rest my case.
Okay, now we ran out of time. I would like to close this session first by thanking all the speakers twice. The first time because you have delivered excellent talk, and all of them have been delivered on time. And the second one because you have animated a very interesting and vibrant discussion. So thank you very much, and please a big round of applause for all of them. I think you well deserve the coffee break. Okay, you earned it. Thank you very much. I guess the Slido will remain open from now on. Okay? Great.
Thanks a lot.
Okay, good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the final session of this Science Meets Policy conference. And a very warm welcome also to those of you who are still with us online. My name is Rose O'Donovan, and I'm the editor-in-chief of the Brussels-based publication AgriFacts. And I had the great pleasure of collaborating with Dr. Bernard Earl, Valentina, and Cinzia at the One Health conference held in Brussels last June. And I must have done something right because you've invited me back here today to the beautiful city of Parma. Now, the title of this moderated panel debate is Opportunities and Challenges on Sharing Genomic Data for Tackling Foodborne Diseases. Following on from the very many interesting discussions yesterday and this morning, the main aim of this session is to debate the topic in more detail with stakeholders and provide the direction of travel for future legislative actions to foster data sharing in Europe. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to get cracking first of all with our panel debate. So without further ado, I would lay out the red carpet as was suggested, and I would invite my distinguished speakers to join me here on the podium, all of whom you have met already this morning. So please join me, please, on the stage. A very warm welcome now to my speakers who are returning. No strangers to anyone in this room. Just to recap, Stefano Moribito, Katja Alt, Koen van den Weijden, Joël Carisso, and Georges Haringhauser. A very warm welcome to you all, ladies and gentlemen. Now, we have a lot to get through before we close the conference before lunchtime. But first of all, please allow me to go through some housekeeping announcements, if I may. For the order of play, firstly, The very well-placed Stefano is going to deliver a 5-minute elevator pitch outlining the state of play of genomic data sharing in Europe. I have a hard act to follow. He's a very tough taskmaster when it comes to timing, so we're going to stick to the rule book as you explained earlier. Then we're going to zoom in, ladies and gentlemen, on certain aspects of what Stefano says during his talk. Just after midday, we will open up the floor for questions, and we aim to continue the question and answer session with you, all of you participants in the room, and those of you, the Slido community, as we're calling it, for around 20 minutes. And once again, Mirko and Eleonora will be sifting through those comments and those questions via the Slido app. So please keep your contributions coming in during the course of this panel debate. During the second part of the session, we're going to change tack a little bit and look into the future and reflect on what needs to be done to create the conditions for a legislative framework for genomic and metadata sharing on foodborne threats here in Europe. This will be followed by a wrap-up interview with EFSA's very own Frank Verdonk. He told me this morning that I'm practically a Belgian because I've been living in his native country for the past 20 years. So that makes me half Irish, half Belgian, if anyone needs to know. And then at the very end, just before 1 p.m, EFSA's Valentina Rizzi will return to the podium to deliver her concluding remarks. So that, ladies and gentlemen, should keep us busy for the next hour and a half. So first up, Mr. Stefano Morabito, I would ask you to deliver your setting the scene presentation and frame the context of this debate. Stefano, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction and to give me the possibility of opening this kind of a panel debate. I would like to start with a reflection on the world system. I mean, and such a reflection has a lot to do with money. You know, the world is investing, has invested, and is investing a ridiculous amount of money in this WGS story. I mean, we have seen incredible numbers from Eric's presentation yesterday with the number of strain sequenced at the FDA, but Europe is not that far from that in terms of money invested. You know, Europe has this European reference laboratory system with at least 8 of them deeply involved in this WGS story, and these URLs are actually supported yearly with budget delivered by the Commission to the laboratories themselves. Not to mention the huge investment to set up and deliver the WGS One Health system at EFSA and ECDC with the mandates, including the tenders for supporting sequencing for the member states, and additional amount of money are actually invested on a national level. We have learned yesterday that several member states are actually equipping, let's say, themselves with a WGS-based system for tackling and managing some foodborne outbreak, at least, and that requires investment as well. So we are looking about a global system requiring a lot of money, which is out there. It's working, it's producing data. And those data are actually produced, in a harmonized way, more or less, and I'm not talking about the contextual metadata, but talking about the sequencing data, they are produced quite easily. And but the point is, and again, we have clearly identified this point yesterday and this morning as well, the system gets more and more complicated once the data are produced, because they need to be shared for sure, which is a central part of this very discussion, but they need to be used. And to use this data seems to be even more complicated. We have gone through the nice network and web of organisms in Germany and terrific number of agreements that Denmark has put in place in order to have the possibility to say to your roommate, I have this data, what should we do with that? And the same goes in all the other countries. So I think that probably we might have been a bit too fast in thinking first on technology and secondly on setting the framework for such a technology to be effectively used for its real purpose. And George, this morning, showed us a legislation which is aiming at targeting the cross-border threats. I think it's a good starting point. It sets quite a few of the rules that are definitely needed, in my opinion, to make a sense of all of these, but it's partial. It's not complete. And the fact that not all the rules are actually set in that document, which is supposed to display the will of the legislators in terms of facilitating the sharing of the information and the use of the information by the different actors, needs to be complemented with something else for the system to work efficaciously. So this is my point. I mean, we have invested money, we have delivered a lot of tools. We have seen yesterday with the interviewer working group producing document and capacity building and EQA to assess the proficiency of the laboratories in producing very, very good results in terms of sequencing. But let me say, the whole story of exchanging contextual data have been totally overlooked, and is part of the missing tiles for completing the whole puzzle. And I think, just to conclude, to stay within the 5 minutes, there was 3
I know,
minutes.
I saw that as well, Stefano. Yeah, well
By the
spotted,
way.
well spotted. We're on track, ladies and gentlemen. We're
No,
on track.
come on. I would just like to conclude by throwing a small stone in the water just to set up ways that might be, hopefully, a good trigger for the discussion. We need to complete the puzzle. We need to find out what the missing tiles are. So if we want to make a sense of the huge investment done globally, we definitely need to find out a way to bridge the gaps between the few tiles that are scattered, here and there. And we have this morning identified part of the story, building trust. We have been saying building trust, and that is a keyword, in my opinion, highlighting at least one or a few of the steps of a possible roadmap to get the system working.
Good. Well, on that segue, on that point, let's hear what the risk managers have to say then, to Katja perhaps first. Based on what Stefano outlined, the infrastructure's there, the investment has been made. The system maybe needs a little bit of tweaking for it to work efficiently. Now, I know that you're relatively new to the federal ministry in Germany, and you come, as you say, with a scientific and a data background. But how are we going to fix or find the missing piece to the puzzle based on the complexity and the current situation that we find ourselves in, Katja? You start. Let's just get the ball rolling. Koen can take it up then, and then we can hear from the other participants.
Yeah, well, thank you very much for this opportunity, and also for the disclaimer about my background, because I'm really learning a lot at the moment. And one of the things that I think is really important is that you can't foresee everything from the beginning. So you have to, at some point, go beyond discussion, go beyond the talking, and start doing and learn on the way, and have some flexibility to accept that it won't be perfect, perhaps, setting up a system from the beginning, but you will, if you accept that you can learn and hear from the others who are actually implementing the system and who are in charge of, to me, for example, one very specific thing that I try to take very much into the project is to listen to the people who are enforcing the law, who are using the data to actually do something with them. And these people are essential to being incorporated in also this kind of networks we are having here. I don't know how many of us really work in the field of implementing what we are talking here at a very high end of seen from a scientific perspective. But I think, yeah, in a few words, I think it's starting at some point, and yeah, being flexible enough to admit that it won't be perfect, but it will be better than doing nothing.
Okay.
That's just as a start, very general.
Sure. Well, Koen, maybe you might pick that up. Again, raising some of the points or returning some of the points that Stefano delivered so eloquently there about, I suppose the system is there, but what's the next step? Like, how are we going to take this forward with a view to making it more efficient and to get the partners on board, right, the stakeholders on board and sort of the bigger picture to drive it forward? And this is something we'll be picking up in the second session as well, post-COVID. So please, Koen, the floor is yours.
No, clear, thank you. Well, what has been made clear to me with today, this morning and also yesterday is that each member state seems to have a different starting position. And we in the Netherlands have been quite we had the advantage that our system could absorb a whole genome sequencing quite well. We did not have to change a lot into, let's say, the system of implementing it, but mainly also how do we use it then in our controls? How do we do our source analysis when there is an outbreak? So for us, we really had a relatively simple task, although it is relative in a sense, because you do still need to take some actions that sometimes can be quite difficult. For us now, it's indeed the next step. How do we then proceed with applying more data that's already out there that is not as easily accessible? Because from all the data that we have, let's say from the governmental side, that is reaping good results. So we do see those outbreaks, we do investigate them, we are able to stop outbreaks, obviously also with the help of the food business operators involved, obviously. And these next steps, we're also not quite sure yet how to proceed with that, because we have heard several presenters as well with, there is some hesitance here and there, and how can we show these other players that they can have a good role to play there, and that there is something in there for them as well. Also just now in the coffee break, people came to me and gave some suggestions which could be useful. So that will be the next step to discuss. So we will talk about that. But we do not have clear answers yet, but definitely some goals to reach still there.
Okay. Stefano, do you want to jump in there now? Because you're coming from maybe a different perspective. Maybe you've got a long-term vision here. What do you see? And something Koen mentioned there about the EU 27 member states, maybe differing interpretation related to the current legislation, for example, on data protection requirements. How do we get to a place where there's, say, a harmonization or an equal interpretation of something like that? Because we are talking about a very complex block of countries here. And as you said, Koen, there's different starting points. I'm not going to ask you, any of you, to start listing out which member state is a forerunner, but there's obviously, a certain number of countries that are lagging behind in this whole field as well, without mentioning any names. For example, lack of resources, lack of government will, lack of political will. So to come back to the question on the sort of the harmonization and the interpretation of something related to data protection requirements. And ladies and gentlemen, I'm throwing in a disclaimer now. I'm a complete non-expert in this field. I'm an agricultural journalist, so I am learning as I'm going and learning a lot from the past few days. So Stefano, I listened to you with great intent.
Yeah, thank you very much, Rose, for saving the impossible questions for me. I'm really very happy to try and jump into the arena, but I mean, you said Europe is 27 different pieces, single unit. And this makes a difference because, Koen, you're right, probably within countries, it's much easier to get things done. The real problem arises when you get to be supranational, when an event involves two or more countries, that were the stomach ache, actually, because of what Rose is saying, GDPR. It's a framework regulation. I'm not trying to steal in your word, John. But as far as I know, GDPR is a framework regulation that need to be interpreted at a national level for it to be, effective. And interpretation vary, of course, within the different countries. So the rules in Italy might be, and indeed are, different from the rules in Germany or in the Netherlands or in Portugal or whatever. And this is one of the major hindrances, because these make the system having no general common rules. roles and responsibility, in my opinion, and I'm not a regulator, that's the way forward. I mean, the idea of setting a general framework of rules, roles, and responsibility might clarify where the data are supposed to go, for what purposes. And that would facilitate, and the cross-border threat legislation is a further step in that direction. If you set the framework, probably that would be much easier for the single member state to cope with I wouldn't say harmonized, but at least a common
interpretation, as you say. I'm going to ask George now to jump in, because this seems to be your, not bête noire, but your area of expertise, for example. So this idea of the common interpretation of rules, current legislation related to GDPR, and the technicalities or the complexities there when it comes to something like whole genome sequencing across member states.
Yes, okay, thank you. I think you've heard, I'm looking to you now. I think you've heard me say this morning that something very important in the privacy regulation has been changed by the court this year, which means that the sharing of data correctly pseudonymized has become much easier to do. And this is a very, very important change, both on the local level and national level, and on the international level. One precaution to be taken is that the contextual data, so the epidemiological metadata, that they are not automatically connected to your sequences that are being shared. But through a coding back to the national authorities, you can ask questions if necessary. So it is very important for also the trust of people and companies that there is a good division when data are being shared between the sequences with a minimum necessary package of metadata, and then you have technical metadata and you have epidemiological metadata. Where does it come from? When was the sampling? Who was the provider? And a code back to the medical dossier when I speak about human. And the rest of the AP data are not connected there. They are only, they can be consulted through the owner of the data on the national level. If you do it like that, then a fairly simple infrastructure can be made, is practically already almost made when I look at ECDC and EFSA, how they collaborate. And you can go one step further if you want, so that at least the law allows it. It is a political decision or a technical decision if you say, well, I want to put really the raw data together in one database to be able to share this is possible, at least under the new regulation on cross-border health threats. So this opens up new possibility. If you allow me, we are talking about trust, and I think trust is of utmost importance. If there is no trust in society, you can stop doing public health. And trust is not, in my opinion, is not the feeling in the stomach or something like that. It is not the effect of a good infrastructure is that people say, okay, I trust you. But it starts with a correct, simple, very transparent infrastructure of the organization that you made and the mandates that are being given. Which can be written on less than one page for a citizen and another page for industry. And both are on the website of my National Institute and of EFSA and ECDC, and everybody has the same text there. How does it work, food health protection in Europe? This is how it works. This is how your data are being handled and protected. And here we ask you as a citizen or a company to collaborate, either voluntary or some essential matters are mandatory. 2 pages on every public authority website, the same text would be wonderful.
Okay, well, thanks for that.
Who takes the initiative?
Well, maybe the segue now goes back to Joao, right? Because this is an element that you raised during your presentation this morning. And thank you, George, for that, because I think it provides the next, some nice segue into our next zooming in session. So I might ask our technical team just to put it back to 10 minutes now for Joao's zooming in session, as we're going to call it, where we're going to dig a little bit deeper on the possible role of industry. And your presentation captured it very well this morning, I think, but as a catalyst to drive that change and to drive this whole idea of genomic data sharing forward. So picking up on George's point on building trust, generating trust, cultivating trust between the different actors and society and bringing society on board. It was the chief scientist yesterday, EFSA's chief scientist, Carlos, who said consumers drive or encourage policymakers, they influence policymakers, and they drive policy. So, Joao, over to you from BioMérieux, based in Lisbon. Please, the floor is yours to deliver the industry perspective on the matter.
So, thank you very much. So, basically, I think when we say trust is indeed this. One of the messages that is important that was already shared and was shared in the first meeting by the head of EFSA was what is data sharing. Open data sharing is great scientifically, but not as actionable as we would like to. But sharing of data is the keystone step for this to happen. The trust is exactly how George says. If there's a legal framework, if there's a purpose, a well-purposed and role-defined, like Stefano did, for the activity of sharing data, and this is very clear, what are the benefits for all of the stakeholders? Eventually it will happen because it's added value for everyone. Also added value for the, what's in it for me, right? It's all risk versus reward. And we were talking about sticks and carrots, right? Everyone wants the carrots, no one wants the stick. Right, and I also thank Koen of the important reminder that it says that is the perception and the public perception and the consumers are the final voice in this. Right, they are the targets for the products of the industry. They are the ones that drive all the economical system behind it, and they are the ones that actually need enough quantity of products with decent prices that can be consumed as society as a whole. And so this is a very fragile system, as we realize, that becomes stronger and stronger as years advance, and it's a perception thing. So this is I think, as soon as the added value for the industry, and we are showing that first on creating genomic data for the industry, what do I gain by doing first the exercise of doing the step further of it which is legislated by doing traceability in my factory, understanding my process better. If I avoid, I can spend much more than I expected in testing, but I can avoid closing my factory for 2 weeks, and that would cost me 2 million. If you see that benefit, and there's that benefit, direct benefit, then you have the buy-in on the industry on that. Then the roles of responsibilities, what is going to be done with the data, who has access to the data, who has not access to the data, how strong the pseudonymization can be made of, that will play an important role. But again, it's not the technical issues, it's the behavioral issues and perception. Risk perception is something that humans are terrible at, right? Mm-hmm. We always see the bad parts, but in truth, we have 60 outbreaks of Listeria in a year, for how many millions of tons of products consumed, right? Mm-hmm. We are much better than we were 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 50 years ago. It's getting better and better, but news travels faster.
Sure.
As a journalist, you know that better than anyone.
I remember, actually, you recalled it this morning, actually, Joao, right, of the case of, there were organic cucumbers from Spain, right? And if I recall correctly, it was the European Commission that sent out that statement back in 2011.
Yes.
That it was the Spanish organic cucumbers that were the cause of the E. coli outbreak. I then attended and moderated a session with iFoam Organics EU in Budapest as a moderator, and I was practically lynched because we broke that story, right? And they were like, that was wrong, you shouldn't have written it. But I was like, it came from the European Commission, so we accepted that, but it came too early. And then, as you say, it was linked with those sprouts in the farm, or from Egypt in the farm in Germany. So it's that level of communication as well that has to be correct, because as you say, there are risks involved, but it's that risk communication that has to be done properly and timely. I wanted to pick up on a point that you made, Joao, about the interplay here between whole genomic sequencing and big data. Can you maybe discuss that a little bit, that sort of interplay between the two?
Well, big data is always a nice keyword, right? But what is really big data? So when you're talking
tell
about...
me, yeah.
Yes. So big data we have in phone companies that are creating terabytes of data daily or hourly, right? We are not creating that amount of data yet, but we are getting there. We have 400,000 salmonellas now in public data, which is starting to get big. So we are getting to the big data part. But the quality of the data is what matters most in big data analysis. And the metadata is now starting to be organized as when we try to move towards controlled vocabularies, towards ontologies, towards ways to well define to create the real big data in this field. When we reach that point, then we have big data, right? So right now, I can tell you that even with 5 strains or 10 strains, we can provide very important information to a client, and that client can change the whole system of a factory based on that information. Mm-hmm. Because you just have to know exactly what the data points are. Big data is important for the next step. For the probably 2 years from now on the discussion, we'll say, okay, we have digitalized, we have digital passports for products, we have hopefully 2 years, not 20, but probably 20. We'll get there. Mm-hmm. Things take much longer than we want to. Okay. So that's the challenge.
Thank you for that, Joao. I'm just going to ask the member states now, or Koen, for example, as a risk manager, on the basis of what Joao said, what's about collaboration there with your organisation, say, and industry? Is there good collaboration there? And just picking up on some of the points that Joao made from his experience at bioMérieux.
Yeah, the thing is that competent authorities have a special relationship, as you might say, with food companies because they have a very defined role. So they have to check if food businesses adhere to the laws at hand. And that gives some friction sometimes, but that gives very little room, let's say, in open discussions. We do not have the ability to give a lot of advice because advice is being given by advisory companies. We come in, we check, are they doing the right things? If so, we leave without any measures taken. And if you think something is wrong, then we can take some measures probably. So from that point of view, we cannot really relate to that relationship in that sense. But saying that, obviously, we do see that there is a very useful case for food businesses to bring that data on the table. Mm. And so if there is some way that you can enhance that, that would be great. And you can do that with just within these type of discussions. But from a regulator point of view, generally what you do, you look into the law and say, what do they need to do? And then you can check upon that. We can ask them to do anything else, but that doesn't help a lot. We do not have a carrot in our suitcase. We only have sticks.
I see. Okay, well, that's bad news for a lot of people there.
Yeah, I'm afraid.
Katja, I'm going to come back to you actually from your role in the federal ministry. A lot of these foodborne threats, third countries are involved, right? Third countries are implicated. What's the level of collaboration with external organizations, for example, from the German perspective?
You mean in the moment we have an outbreak?
Yeah, for example, if an outbreak is originally from a third country outside of the European Union, what sort of collaboration is there between the federal government, for example, and an external organization beyond Europe?
Yeah, unfortunately, I have only been at the ministry now for a year, and this is a year of times in peace.
Yes,
so we haven't had
peace times. Yeah.
Yes,
okay.
Exactly, and we haven't had that. Lots of outbreaks I have been involved in, so I can't give you very much of an insight into that, but I would say from my perspective, as having been in several institutes and also in the other side of the story, because I worked in public health too, that there is a will of cooperating in a very general speaking way. And from my activities, for example, in the field of, I work also involved in the Codex Alimentarius, which is reaching out also to the other countries. I would say in a time where there is no huge pressure, there is always the willingness to
I
cooperate.
see what you mean. And
but
as
I
you say,
haven't been in the fire
Sure.
of an outbreak happening.
And as you say, Codex Alimentarius covers that as a net or as an infrastructure, let's say. You spoke about the coalition of the willing, or you phrased it something. It was picked up on a point you made yesterday, George, about pilot projects. You in one of your questions that you raised, I found that quite interesting. You referred to it as the coalition of the willing and small pilot projects. Was that in relation to getting industry on board? Maybe you might delve into that a little bit.
Yeah, let me maybe focus the bridge with the same question that you asked. What I'm always astounded about is that we are talking on the European level about the exchange of data, EFSA, ECDC, the food and human side, and so on. But of course, as you indicated, as everybody indicated, the food products and the raw products do not always come from Europe. But to say, it comes from the whole world, from everywhere. So, as we've seen in the Hamburg outbreak, for example, that you have to look over the frontiers of Europe. Do we have an infrastructure there? No, we do not have a good infrastructure there. And that is really, really, really a very important point. Now, from the legal perspective, we have now the possibility of sharing our sequence data with the minimum package of metadata in principle, a global database. There are several projects from the past few years who looked into this, that there is I would say, a 60–70% prepared infrastructure within ENA, for example, the European Nucleotide Archive, that is being upheld by, I think, 15 or 16 countries, European countries. They finance that can be further developed. And where you can share these kind of data, either publicly or protected. I think there are huge opportunities to develop this very, very fast. And Europe could be here in the lead. Absolutely, there is knowledge, there is the possibility, and it costs, because I'm talking about ENA, because this costs relatively little money compared to making completely new repositories. So this is a very important focus, I think, especially because someone has to take the lead. So we're looking to European agencies, of course, that like EFSA and ECDC, but you also can look at certain member states to collaborate on this. This could be a very good way forward to the global sharing of sequence data, which is of utmost importance. Last point is quality of data. Please, EFSA, stick to that. The quality of data makes the quality of, and I say it as a lawyer, because if you have poor quality data, you run enormous economic risks by the consequences that people make out of analysis that are totally wrong. The quality of data. I've been involved in the AMR infrastructure, also with other countries, and there, and this is my advice, we had two levels, so to say. You had the formal level, which was of high quality and so on, and we had, besides that, the same infrastructure for countries who start to do their sequencing and so on, and they were allowed to experiment, so to say. Often the quality of their data was still very lower, and this was being divided from the quality of high quality data that are expected for full-blown countries. So having a kind of project where people can do exercise, learn it, do their things before they're actually putting their data in the same quality level in the EU repository, so to say, is very, very important. Thank you.
Thank you for that, George. We're now going to, we're on schedule, but we're going to turn to the final zooming in session now. And that's going to explore the evolved societal expectations and perceptions, particularly, as we said, over the course of the two-day event, post-COVID-19 pandemic. How this may influence the process and how generally it's going to drive data sharing forward. So that's sort of, we've looked at the technical side, we've looked at the budgetary side, we've looked at the interplay between member states and also third countries. So now, Stefano, I turn to you. The role of consumers in this, the role of society driving this whole field forward and developing it. To what extent can that influence data sharing going forward and influence, I suppose, the bigger legislative question for legislators down the line? I would ask the technical staff to put it at 15 minutes so that we can just regroup a little bit on this final zooming in session. So Stefano, I turn to you and we'll come to the other panelists in due time.
Okay, thank you very much. I think that this is the real core business of the whole discussion. And you have mentioning that we are now in the post-pandemic period, and this makes a difference with respect to the pre-pandemic period, because, you know, the civil society got used to listen about genomic data. And this changes everything, because I mean, if up to 2019, probably it would have been really difficult for anyone to explain what genomic data are, how they can be used to, you know, to try and face possible health threat, either on the food side or not. That doesn't make much difference. Now the things are different, and this is the first point. The second point is that, you know, citizens are actually demanding more and more access to the information, which is unprecedented. You know, yeah, the internet, of course, gives a big hand in that, but I think there was a switch in the general social awareness, so to say, with respect to the different action put in place to protect citizens' health. And this is a game-changing model, because people is more aware, people is, you know, more prone to understand what genomics are, and people wants to know about what the health authorities are putting in place to protect their own health. And I believe that this should be probably the next goal. I mean, certainly all the technicalities with respect to the ontology, the quality of data, and the completeness of the data, the usability of data, open data versus fair data versus whatever you want to consider is an issue, but the possibility to give access to this piece of information to the general public is something that should not be neglected now in the post-pandemic era.
And have you seen that increased demand? Have you actually quantified that in terms of, you know, is there market research to suggest that people are genuinely interested? They read the newspapers, but are they genuinely going to these websites and looking up specific information? And it's related to public health, right? So that's sort of, you know, it's quite concentrated or quite precise, right, what the information that they're looking for. But you've seen that development since COVID, is what you're saying?
Yeah, I mean, staying on this COVID-19 story, it's very easy to get an idea of that simply by looking at Google Trends, or what are the subject of the researches that the people do over the internet. And as a matter of fact, if you zoom in into those requests, you can see that people not just say, what's COVID-19, what's SARS-CoV-2, but get into the single variants, for instance. So, I mean, I myself learned about the variant, you know, the SARS-CoV-2 variants in 2020. And I'm a scientist, I'm a microbiologist, you know, yeah, I knew that all the viruses have variants, but, you know, this is something that indeed points the accent on the willingness of the civil society to get informed by that. And in my opinion, we are not doing enough to inform them, even though we have been able to deploy wonderful ways and techniques to protect citizens' health, but we are not that good at explaining to citizens what we are doing.
Okay. Well, I'm going to turn to the risk managers now, if you don't mind. Thank you for that, Stefano. I think you've sort of set the scene once again as to this sort of the situation we find ourselves in. Katja, Taking what Stefano just said there, there seems to be a sort of a legitimate expectation on one side from civil society and consumers, but is there now a legitimate, let's say, responsibility on the side of governments, on the side of risk managers to provide that information to civil society and society at large? And to what extent are both the Netherlands and Germany delivering on that responsibility?
Okay, let's start by picking up on what Stefano said at the beginning. And as a scientist, which I'm still more than a politician, I must say I tried to prepare for this block in beforehand, and I did some research on actual evidence for what you're trying to propose here. Is there evidence for the population liking or disliking the methods we're using? And I couldn't find anything. It was just some small research, so I'm not sure, and I couldn't very secure say, yes, there is more acceptance. I could infer from common sense that people are accepting it more due to COVID, but I'm not sure of it. I don't have any evidence. But I would surely say that it is of high importance to involve, and I think this is not a field that scientists from our more molecular or bioinformatic background should be able to answer, but more from the societal sciences. And I see very few people involved from that field in these kind of discussions we're having here, who could probably deliver some better evidence for the real acceptance of the method.
Sure, that's
I can only report from one single experience I had in Germany, in the position I have right now. That is that I was approached by a NGO covering the interests of consumers, and they had lots of questions related to food safety, and one of the questions was addressed to the implementation of this method, WGS, and they were highly interested, and they were highly impressed by what we're doing. But, you know, I'm not sure if this is just arising from the fact that it sounds fancy, if you explain that to people, and not from the full grasp of what this method is really capable of doing and changing.
But that goes back to communication, right,
Yes,
Katja? That goes back to communication. And I know yourself, your own background, it's very much in communicating as well and getting the message out there of the impact that something like genome sequencing and the impact it can have on people's lives. But you would agree, as you say, anecdotally or on the basis of research that you've conducted, that there's definitely an evolved perception.
Yes.
I mean, as I say, or as Stefano said, you're an expert in your field, but someone like me, I have no scientific background, but these are terms and concepts that were delivered nightly and daily to us during COVID-19. So I suppose our general understanding sort of broadened. But just, I'll go to Koen now from the Dutch perspective, and then I might pick up, because we do have a behavioural scientist in our midst as well, right, George? So you might pick up on some of those points, looking at the societal sort of progression in this whole area. But Koen, from the Dutch perspective, what was your experience within your structure?
Well, first let's start with a more general comment on trust and in relation to, let's say, these type of methods and sharing data. Currently in the Netherlands, there's very low trust in the government. And we see this.
But you've got an election coming up as well, so, and...
Which is, yeah, actually the reason why we have an election coming up is basically because of this low trust, in a sense. So there's definitely, well, maybe it's not a problem per se, because people can vote and then they can vote for these type of parties that take this into account. So I don't think this is something that I want to delve into that much. I'm not a politician.
That's for another day, Koen.
Right, I'm not a politician. Right. But the thing is that when it boils down to implementing these type of methods and sharing data, I think the most important question that the public has is, am I being protected enough? Am I being protected by the government? And again, there's low trust currently, but we have to build that trust also then. Again, build it up to show that these type of systems can help and that they not only try to prevent or solve an outbreak, but also prevent an outbreak for starting. And that's going to be difficult. I mentioned before that food safety is never going to be zero, or never going to be complete, 100%. There will always be somebody becoming ill at some point. Obviously, the goal ultimately will be that, but that will be difficult. And the thing is, if you're sharing I'm not quite sure if the regular consumer is really thinking about that in this detail. We do know that the companies, the food businesses, are thinking about it in this detail because of all the aspects that we've just mentioned. So I don't think that this discussion is so much with the consumers on this level.
Yes, and you're talking, it's a very technical level, and I agree with you there, but it's the concept of data sharing, it's the concept of maybe greater collaboration, that appeals to consumers, I think, right? And I see Joao nodding your head as well, maybe from the industry side, and then I'll get to our scientist, our behavioural scientist at the very end, to wrap up maybe, George, if you don't mind. But George, I see you agreeing with Koen there. Oh, sorry, pardon me, Joao.
Yes, so I agree that the general public has a greater awareness of genomics and strains because we lived COVID, right? But we also live in an area of small time span of attentions and not very focused. People know that it's related to COVID, not sure if they know what is the impact on all the rest of the society. This awareness is needed, but might be transient because it's human nature. Then I'll also refer to George to comment on that. But one of the things that also people like is to see the sticks and never the carrots. And concerning that you don't have carrots in your bag, I think that is also very cultural and very dependent on the laws of different countries. So I know that in other countries there are actually collaboration between agencies and industry, because it is possible to help, because it's perceived as a positive thing and not a negative thing. So the cultural aspect is also very important, and these kind of things should be alleviated. Carrots can be as simply to have clearly stated what are the goals and the purposes, and it's a big carrot already. Because if they know I can do the checklist and be safe, then it's already a good compromise. So this kind of perception, again, for the industry, they know that it's coming. So the industry has this perception that, yes, these methods are coming. How can I use them to improve my own process? How can I deliver safer food using these methods, not getting the sticks all along the way? Mm-hmm. And the first adopter, like it was discussed, and maybe a good pilot, like you mentioned, is needed with a nice group of companies that would allow them to show that by collaborating, everyone will gain in the end.
So that's going back to your coalition of the willing, George. So you might pick up on that point first and then go to the behavioural psychology on that sort of the third zooming in on evolved consumer perception. And you have 3 minutes, George.
That's enough. That's,
No pressure, no pressure.
I honestly think that this pilot, in which one way or the other, should be organized very soon, together with EFSA and ECDC and a couple of member states who have the capacity and so on to, and of course a group from industry to say, okay, we're going to search for it, because when you talk about trust, you need to organize trust, and to organize trust within the public. The public, maybe they don't trust our government, I agree with you, but the main thing is, do the public trust the food industry and the retailers and the producers? That is, it is not a question of a government is supervising this and so on. This must be trusted too, but the main trust is what do the... I think that we have the momentum and the time to build this trust, which means, of course, that the data from industry, as well as duly pseudonymized from the public, should be in a public repository, should be visible, should be, and maybe with a delay of a couple of weeks or a couple of months, so that governments, authorities can take their decisions if something happens without having the press in their neck and so on, that or other countries saying, hey, you have a problem, while my minister did not already know that. So these kind of things, authorities should have the time to make their analysis, risk analysis, decisions, and so on. So with a delay, possibly, of a couple of weeks or a couple of months, my opinion and my experience in the scientific project of COMPARE that I worked and had several work packages in the past years, I think we should be audacious and concentrate primarily on a public repository where the sequences are being deposited that can be seen by everyone eventually, that with a minimum of metadata, of course, and well curated, and then I'm looking at the European agencies, well curated. So for example, sequences from very rare diseases should not be there because they can be traced back. Sequences from very rare events should not be there. So we must be very intelligent. But in general, when we talk about salmonella and so on, this is possible at the moment. I'm convinced of that. But we should experiment with that. That is 9,
Very briefly,
8.
I'm going to give you very briefly, just in a synopsis, in 3 or 4 words or 3 or 4 lines, the whole, as a behavioural scientist, we discussed it last night in the margins. What's your view since COVID-19 and, of course, your work and involvement with the WHO? Have you seen that level of evolved perception among society and civil society?
I think what we learned through the COVID period and what is actually, but this is purely a subjective, my observation around me, I think that many more people now say, first see, then believe. Organize it in a right way, be transparent, be simple, please be simple. Every system that is complex cannot be trusted, but because people cannot look through it.
And transparency,
be simple without denying the complexity. That is actually, and then people say, okay, I see it and then I believe it, and not, I don't trust on your beautiful blue eyes.
But the messaging, as you
I
say,
do, but the public doesn't. Sorry.
Okay, George, that's for later, guys. That's for later. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to open it up to the floor now. We've generated a lot of information. We've covered a lot of ground, I think you would agree, in the past hour only. So I'm going to take questions first from the floor, and then I'm going to ask my co-moderators, Mirko and Eleonora, to intervene perhaps from our Slido community. But hands up if anyone has a question here first in the room. And we'll get a microphone out to you as soon as possible. So anyone would like to raise their hands and ask these very intelligent experts a further question? I do have a tentative hand at the back there. If we get, yeah, go ahead. Perhaps just introduce yourself and tell us. You all know each other, I get the feeling, but for the benefit of the Slido community.
So Magnus Simonsson from the ERL for foodborne viruses. You're talking very much about trust. And as I understand from social sciences, that is based on confidence, meaning that they divide trust and confidence. And confidence would mean that you actually deliver something that you can trust, so to say. Then if every time I open the tap there will be water, then I trust the producer, the water production company. So there has to be a delivery before, and that's for everything in society. And someone mentioned there is lower and lower trust for government and so on. So there has to be some kind of delivery before you actually can gain the trust. So that's more of a comment than a question, I would say.
Okay. Would anyone like to jump in there? I suppose it's setting up that infrastructure and making sure that's working and operable. And as you say, there has to be an element of gaining trust. Koen, you take the mic there. You'd like to chime in?
Yeah. When it comes to trust, maybe it's a good thing to share also that when it comes to consumers, and we are also all consumers, that almost all of them, there's only a very tiny infinitesimal amount of people that grow their own food. Most people go to the supermarket and are confident, if we're going to confidence, that they buy food that is safe. And sometimes people become ill, but the risk is really, really, really low. I mean, compare it to, let's say, 100, 200 years ago, a lot of people would die from infectious diseases. Not only from food, mostly from other sources probably, but also from food. And so we are in a very positive situation in that sense. And so what we're talking about is not so much the situation that we do not trust the food or we do not trust the food producers, and let's not talk about governments, but it's about how are they using the data. And using data, we've discussed this, and we've heard different things, like put everything out there, only with very limited data, which would not be of use a lot for, let's say, more scientific questions, but it would be of a lot of use of identifying outbreaks. Or, and that was the other side, do we put all the data, but only maybe for a small community that can do the science on it? And I think that is where we can define where trust and confidence also ends and begins. And so we really would have to think on how are we going to use it, and then see, okay, what type of limits can you put on that? What type of boundaries do you need to be able to use it? I think that is the setting that we should not forget.
That's the sweet spot, as you say, Koen. Anyone else from here in the room, first of all, before we go to the Slido community? I don't see any hands. So Mirko and Eleonora, perhaps Mirko, you have some questions there coming in from our online participants.
Yeah,
go right ahead.
One very important question, open data, from Andrew Page goes in the direction of the discussion before from George. Is open data sharing broken, given the number of countries that consume public data but don't give back?
Help me to understand the question. Is open data broken, given that's...
Is open data sharing broken, given the number of countries that consume data but don't give back?
Okay. Yeah, the Romans already said, do ut des, you give something, I give something. That it is a very important principle, I think, especially in the academic world. When you share data in the academic world, we work together. So you give data, I give data. In the public responsibility world, it is a little bit different, I think, that there are certain obligations and one should comply to these obligations. Every country the same now. That so if there are no data, we don't expect data. If there are data, you should share that with them. That the regulation that I refer to is already on this, built on this principle. You give to me and I give to you. And you want to know certain circumstances. I have to inform you about the things that I would like to know in your country too. That is the basic principle. So I don't see now under the new regulation and how we go ahead that can be in the situation that some countries do not share the data and others do. Everybody, at least in Europe, has to share the data on the same principles, the same details, and so on. That in academic work, as I said, it is different. And there, when I do research, when I share my data with another researcher, I expect from them the data back. That is, of course, is that hopefully an answer to the question.
Okay, Mirko, we might take another one. Oh no, if you don't mind, I'm going to take someone. I see a hand at the very back there. Can we get a microphone? And we'll go back then to the online participants.
Just a comment on that question too, if I may. I wouldn't necessarily say it's broken when you have certain countries or certain participants that are primarily uploading data. We have case examples where you have data there that could link to maybe a source of an outbreak, and that's fine if people don't upload, but they can't just then sit on the data. Somebody could make an argument then that if somebody has data, let's say linking a current outbreak that they see growing in NCBI to Enoki mushrooms, for instance, but they're not telling or contacting, being like, hey, we have this data, it's private, we just wanted to let you know. I mean, that would still be something and still moving forward and, trying to solve an outbreak. And and I'm not going to get into whether, it's then their responsibility, but at some point, it becomes kind of one-sided. If somebody is uploading all their data, it's everything that's going on in that country, and linkages cannot be made.
Stefano, would you like to add anything to that?
Yeah, just a quick reaction to that, because I believe that this very last piece of discussion brings us back to the beginning of the discussion itself. We need to complete the framework for the whole system to function, because, yeah, data sharing is the key, but for the system not to be broken by different behaviors of the different actors in giving and taking or consuming the data, it is necessary that rules are defined. So, again, rules, roles, and responsibility. That means a framework.
Good. And which is, you're segueing again into our second session, but a very good point, because we will be discussing that in more detail, the need to build, as Stefano says, that legislative framework and the discussions ahead of that, and the need for minimum requirements. But perhaps one more from Mirko and Eleonora, and then we're actually going to go to our second part at 12:30, right? So Mirko, perhaps one more.
Yeah, there are several questions about trust. So we just pick one that's a little bit more stimulating discussion. So trust is hugely important, but is the difficulty to achieve it being used as an excuse to avoid responsibility to protect public health? There are several other questions on trust, but I guess this one more or less goes in that direction.
Who wants to jump in there on the trust issue? It's a real theme, and as you say, this could be the topic for our next conference by the sound of things, right? When is the next one, by the way, Stefano?
3 years.
3 years' time. Okay, we'll see you back here in 3 years' time. George, you look pensive.
Yeah, I understand. Is it an excuse to get out of what?
Taking responsibility?
Responsibility to protect public health. So the fact that you don't achieve trust, or the difficulty to achieve trust, is sort to avoid.
Well, I see more the danger that we talk a lot we philosophize a lot about trust, and we drink a glass of wine and so on, and then we move on and we do nothing eventually. So you have to, in this regard, I fully support our colleague from Sweden there. You have to make it concrete. And that is what I was trying to do, to say, well, you have to build your infrastructure in a decent way, transparent and so on, and then you have to prove that it works. So the proof is in the pudding, and then people say, okay, first see and then believe. And finally, the feeling of trust is believing that, but before that comes seeing that it works and that it's transparent, and that we as a community show to the public that we are not naive. There are a lot of companies who have tried to avoid the rules, and it depends very much in which domain you're looking, and to show the public that you have a coalition of the willing. We would like to be preventive. We would like to, knowing that there is also a coalition of the not willing, that who drive around meat around Europe for many times, and which never comes into production. But there are all kinds of funny things, or maybe not so funny things, going on with food. And you have to be aware that this is why we are building these kind of structures, to find out where it goes wrong and so on. So we must not be naive. We must be fully responsible. And in my opinion, talking about trust, then I support the statement, talking about trust must not be an excuse, a philosophical excuse to do nothing.
Okay.
You have to build concrete structures, mandates, agreements, and so on.
I might turn to João then, picking up on those points from the industry perspective, from the Biomérieux perspective. Do you agree? What's been your experience from your work?
Well, as a proxy, again, for the industry,
as
right?
proxy, yeah.
trust is fundamental. We're talking about trust between industry and authorities. We have to talk about trust within the industry themselves. And that's why I propose the trusted third-party system, because that is a way to get to the trust level in a certain way. It's important to see, also to say that the examples that I pointed out is self-regulating examples from the industry. Because, again, humans are terrible at perceiving risk, and we always remember the bad things, not the good things, right? But actually, industry self-regulates when they do these consortia, these co-ops, and they actually have ways and mechanisms to deal with internal problems that, at the end, the goal is to provide better product, safer product, and therefore more profit.
Sure. And as you say, sometimes that's the bottom line. As you say, that's as you said in your presentation earlier on, and it's common sense. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to leave the Q&A session for now, and we're going to go, we're going to stick to the timeline that we were given, following in the footsteps of my predecessor as chairperson. We're now going to go to part 2, and under the theme of towards a new operative framework. So for this next session, we are going to change tack slightly. We're going to look at working towards, as Stefano says, a new legislative framework and the discussion that goes into that. More specifically, we're going to reflect on the conditions and what we're referring to as minimum requirements, which I'm quite interested in paving the way for this new legislative framework and the role of stakeholders that we find ourselves here on stage with in achieving that. So what exactly needs to be done to create the conditions for what we're going to refer to as an operational framework for sharing genomic data here in the EU in this specific area of foodborne pathogens and threats, etc. So I'm just actually going to correct the technical team, and we're going to put that at 15 minutes, our countdown clock. So maybe change that to 15, and then we're back on track in terms of the timeline. So Katja and Koen, as GRIS managers here, what's your take on this in terms of building a new legislative framework and also the idea of creating minimum requirements? What would you define as minimum requirements? I know a lot of discussion has been taking place, but maybe to centre it now towards the legislative framework.
Want to go first?
Katja, thank you.
Well, I think that beyond legislation, or before legislation, there has to be a practicability aspect or fundament to all of this. And one of the first things before legislation, before putting this into some sort of agreement in Germany, for example, for my experience, is that we're talking about, we have to think at the practical level, which means involving the people who are enforcing the law, who know what they have to do. Put all the thoughts and needs together before starting to actually rule something. And what we are trying to target in this frame of WGS for foodborne outbreaks is, for example, the aspect of comparability of data. This is one major issue that stands in front of everything else. Minimum requirements derives also from resources, from understanding, from knowledge, expertise. So it's a real difficult question I would say that in Germany we're way before thinking about the law and what we have to change in the law. There's also a lot of reluctance to change the existing law. So we're trying to work on the more paralegal area. And first of all, before we start enforcing anything, try to define what would be the common denominator, the smallest one that actually is possible to achieve.
Mm-hmm. That's your starting point, as you say. Okay. Yes. And what about capacity building there? You mentioned capacity building. Is that I'm thinking, for example, for other member states, maybe less so the likes of the Netherlands and less so Germany, I'm thinking of other member states that still have to develop a lot of this infrastructure. Or is there, when you talk about the common denominator, would you say that we have a common denominator at European level? Koen, you mentioned different starting points. So I'm just curious, as a journalist even, do we have a sort of a common, is there a baseline here?
Well, apparently not, because my answer to the question will be very different from Katja's.
Okay.
I think that's basically from the position where we are in as the Netherlands compared to Germany. From my point of view, most of the legislation is perfectly fine. We can live with that given the goal that we have, namely identifying an outbreak as soon as possible and trying to find the source. All the basic building blocks are there. In the Zoonosis Directive, in the General Food Law, it's all there basically. Not always as concrete, but what do you need as a minimum in a database that you share for, let's say, human and food isolates only from governmental side is only two things. It's the sequence and know who the owner is, if you need more data. That's all there is to it, because once you identify a cluster and you see, oh, there's human isolates, there's food isolates, you say, okay, now we need the food regulator, so the competent authority says, okay, I know where these isolates come from, and I do my investigation and see if they are the source, yes or no. And then basically it's all, which happens also prior to whole genome sequencing. You do your investigation and see if you have the source there, yes or no, and you take measures if needed. On the human side, you can say, oh, wait a minute, this cluster is interesting. We want to maybe go back to the patients and see if we can establish some transmission route. If we can see that indeed we can help the food regulators to show, oh, they all bought a specific type of product and all at the same retailer and these type of things. So the human epidemiological side. And then you bring that together and say, okay, there's a problem here, you act on that. So from my point of view, given where we are, it's all there.
The building blocks are there. Right, okay.
And we're using it as I just mentioned.
But it's going back to the point you made earlier. It's the common interpretation related to whether it's the general food law, whether it's the data protection requirements. Do you want to maybe pick up on that a little bit?
Exactly. I tend to partially disagree with you when you say that the actual regulation, if you cite the Zoonosis Directive and the General Food Law, are fit for purpose. They're too wide. Simply, they're too wide. You can accommodate anything with it. And that actually introduced too many degrees of freedom with respect to the interpretation in the different member states. And this is why the system doesn't work completely when it comes to sharing of information among the member states, not within the member states. Probably it's true what you say if you look from the inner perspective to what is happening in the Netherlands. But if we think about a global system, or maybe not global, let's say continental system, we might need more clear specification of what the legislator wanted to express by defining that, unsafe foods should not be placed on the market, which is really a too wide concept, in my opinion. But just to also cite a bit what Katja say, and I completely agree, start from the what it can be achieved and the capacity building story. Actually, there have been quite a few experiences over the last years in terms of building the capacity in training the risk manager on reacting to signals arising from whole genome sequencing. There have been quite a few simulation exercises done in different member states within the framework of the One Health European Joint Problem. And I think that multiplying this experience would be the key to grow up a general capacity, not just only on the technical issue, but also on the managerial issues.
Okay, thank you, Stefano. So as you say, capacity building from the bottom up, as you say, from that bottom up approach. George, just picking up from presentations that were made yesterday, what would it take for Europe to develop its own genome tracker network, right? How far away are we from something like that? There's sort of like a European-wide network on whole genome sequencing for foodborne pathogens identification.
Well, I think you should ask that to other people, not to the lawyer here. I think that when it comes to the regulatory part, we are quite already far away. I agree with what you said. I think that at the moment on the human side, we are fairly good on track when it comes to the regulatory part. Maybe that we would like to have just for the, not to misunderstand each other. There is no doubt about that, that for certain pathogens, we need a code back to the original medical dossier, something like that, to be able to do outbreak control. That there might be questions, but in my firm opinion about the interpretation of this new regulation, this should not be a problem. The problem is more on the food side, and as you explained, I think very well, there are too many degrees of freedom there. And so there is a lot of room for interpretation that, and we should avoid that because this undermines, again, the trust in, can we do this, can we do that? No, it should be clear that on the human side, there is now enough secondary legislative power to describe and agree with each other what data are to be reported. And this becomes very important. That another thing is that which small package of data should be given with sequences to do the right job. Not all the epidemiological data, because then you get a lot of problems. GMI, the Global Macro Identifier, who will convene next week or the week after that again in Vancouver, they already a couple of years ago, quite some years ago, proposed a minimum package, which is very handy in my opinion, and very small. It is a little bit more than you said. It also describes which country a sequence comes from and the date of sampling is important, so that you do know, do I work with very old sequences or new recently, and so on. But that's it, and that should be enough. That.
But generally speaking, George, are you saying that there isn't really, is there a political will? Maybe I'm directing it to the wrong person here, but I'm getting the sense that maybe there isn't the political will on the part of the European Commission. I'm just thinking yes, do you want to get in there, João?
Let me shortly say, my feeling is that we are now in the right momentum. After COVID, after some outbreaks, on a European level at least, to push ahead now and organize things. We must not wait another year or 2 years or something. It's now or, well, never is very...
And that's why I suppose this meeting, these 2 days discussions, as you say, creation of the coalition, the willing, getting that message to we've got a new administration, of course, next November with a new European Commission, and there's a lot of change, from what I understand, in the legislative process when it comes to, you mentioned the General Food Law. There is, of course, the Sustainable Food Systems legislation that's currently sort of in the process. But João, you wanted to get in there.
Yeah. So, Rose, you asked if you have how far are we from the?
Yes, that was a question that I put. It was something I picked up yesterday during the presentation.
I'm more as the bioinformatician and not the industry person.
I hear you. Okay.
Here. So
thanks, João.
I think we are already there. We had 2 excellent talks yesterday that show that ECDC and EFSA already have the system in production. Is it complete? No, but it's already there and it's a good start. So we already have our own genome tracker. Is it public data? No. Does it need to be public data? I'll leave the question.
Okay, hanging in the air there, João. Okay, interesting. Okay, well, listen, we're going to wrap up there because we've got another sort of, let's say, a third part to our proceedings this morning, or this afternoon, rather. I'm conscious of time now, so we're going to wrap it up. I would like to thank my panelists. I think we've covered a lot of ground. We covered a lot of topics and all very interesting inputs, very lively, and also to ladies and gentlemen in the room and those of you participating online. So once again, a very warm round of applause for my speakers, Stefano Marabito, George Haringhauser, João Carrizo, Katja Alt and Koen van der Weijden. Thank you very much indeed. And I would invite you now to return to your seats. Thank you very much. You may return to your seats. Thank you very much indeed. So now, ladies and gentlemen, we're approaching the latter part of our discussion. I would now invite Mr. Frank Verdonk to join me on the podium for what we're calling the wrap-up interview. Frank is no stranger to anyone in this room. He is head of unit in charge of the biological hazards and animal health and welfare here at EFSA since September 2022, having previously served as team leader on the feed team, having received a master's in biotechnology and a PhD in biotechnology and veterinary medicine from Ghent University in Belgium. I can describe Frank as homegrown as he completed his traineeship and started out his illustrious career here at this very organisation just over 10 years ago. So a very warm welcome to Frank, please, from all of you. So Frank, as I said, we've had a very fruitful discussion over yesterday, the duration of yesterday and this morning, early afternoon. We've covered a lot of ground. We heard a lot of different perspectives, a lot of voices, our stakeholders there at the latter panel discussion. What would you say, Frank, are the key take-home messages coming from the panel debate and all of the presentations that have been made previously since yesterday afternoon, since you kicked off just after lunch?
Yeah, thank you, Rose. Is this working?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, my background is indeed molecular biology, biotechnology, but I finished my studies more than around 20 years ago, so I was really struggling sometimes also to follow with the technical terms if you're out of really the science for more than 10 years. But it's really impressive to see the speed of the field and the developments ongoing. First, I would like to step a bit back and look at the history of the event and see the first event that you had, where you started with the discussions on, okay, we want to have a platform developing at European level. And I think now what we have today, as just also mentioned by Joao, there is a system that has been put in place. So I think there is a large achievement already done. Whereas in the previous event, there were different presentations, EFSA and ECDC, because there were still different views. Yesterday, we showed that we are coming together, working close together and delivering also in one presentation. Of course, further technical developments need to be done. I heard also yesterday that uploading is still a bit difficult, time-consuming, so that we need to look into. But what I hear now is that yeah, technical developments are going on and we expect to have further development, but the challenge is really on the non-technical part, and I think we spent also quite some time on that this morning. Let me start maybe with the legislative aspect, and we heard from George that progress has been made there, certainly at the human part, but unfortunately we needed a pandemic maybe to make this happen. At the food side, yeah, there is already a lot of legislation, and I agree that maybe we can discuss more on the interpretation on how to implement that. Possible role of the industry, I think this is key. And if we really look forward towards a next event, Stefano said maybe in 3 years, I think involving industry as really a partner into the organization would be very, very wise to consider to broaden, because scope of a lot of discussions here are still very scientific, technical, but if we really want to make the step forward in the non-technical area, I think we need to really work with industry as a partner. And it has been mentioned that there are collaborations shown already today across member states with industry. So there are examples that are available. Key there is how to provide added value. I think the carrot there is really needed. There will be no government really be able to impose rules to make the system working. That there should be really the added value, and I think it was also clear in the presentations that knowing what's going on in a preventive way might be the trick for them, but that there were constraints on cost, but also the timing of getting the results from their side. So I'm hopeful also here technology will move on, so we will have development on that in the future. let's look about the topic of the infrastructure, because it was said we need infrastructure at European level. I think we already have this with the EFSA ECDC system in place. We have the capacity to also upload data from our system into the public databases. So I think it's just a matter that we get a clear demand from our community, from our stakeholders, the member states, to make this happen. So maybe it could be an outcome of this meeting that the member states come back to us and ask clearly, please, EFSA ECDC, go in this direction and make this happen. And then we can also go in the direction of 2 different speeds. I see here good presentations of member states working a lot on WGS. We had Denmark, the Netherlands, Italy, Germany, but we also discussed about other member states. Not everybody is at the same level. We need to keep an eye on them to ensure that they also develop and go forwards, but this should not hold on the development of what was called the coalition of the willing. So let's further develop this together and ensure that we keep maybe 2 different levels of speed into the future, into our minds. Another part, trust was a big topic, maybe a good one to follow up in the next event. What I would like to come back on is something that Koen also said. There was not really a problem with trust on food security, food safety. That's very high. We also did a poll on that, and we got quite good results from that investigation in EFSA. The key issue is here the data sharing, and how do we establish this? How do we go around this? Connected with this, also the raising risk awareness in different type of communities, like the risk assessors. We are here with part of the community, but I think there are still risk assessors that also need to have further explanation on this. Certainly also the risk managers. Legal community was also mentioned by George, and the legislators. And then also important to train them what to do with the signals that we are generating, because I think that's also where we need to show what we will do with it, and coming back to the trust part. Relating maybe to a question that you were asking, Roos, on where are we in Europe compared to the US with the genome tracker, I want to also specify here that in Europe we have a completely different situations. We have all the different member states, it was referred to, have different legislation, different interpretation, different cultural backgrounds, but I think we are on a path towards more data sharing. I don't think we can stop this, that's clear, but I expect it will really take more time probably compared to sure. The US, to Canada, for us in Europe to find what are the minimum criteria and to make steps forward.
That's very clear. Thank you for that, Frank. And maybe a last question then to sum up, I suppose, and you touched upon that in your introduction, but what are the next steps for you and your colleagues here at EFSA going forward in this whole area of genome sharing in foodborne, for foodborne threats, etc.?
Yeah, so as said yesterday by Mirko, we are driven by the community that are really the member states. So we are driven by their demands, and we are having our values of openness and transparency very high. So if the member states want to go in data sharing, we will adapt our systems to make that possible, and then also leave the option to the member states if they want to share their data to which community, with also different levels of access. So we are available to further support the member states into this, but we need really to work together, and we are waiting also for the clear directions that we get from our stakeholders here.
Very clear indeed, a very clear message to end on, Frank. Thank you very much indeed. Ladies and gentlemen, Frank Verdonk, your colleague here at EFSA. So thank you very much, Frank. You can return to your seat. So that's it, folks. We've come to the end of this Science Meets Policy Conference. Before I hand the floor over to EFSA's Valentina Rizzi to deliver her concluding comments, I would just like to take this opportunity to thank Dr. Bernard Uhl and his team here at EFSA, especially Scienzia, Mirko, Valentina and Eleonora, with whom I had the great pleasure of collaborating. A word of thanks also to our technical team at the very back for making sure that everything ran so smoothly since this very enriching conversation kicked off yesterday. And thank you to you, ladies and gentlemen, and those online participants for joining us online. Until we meet again, potentially at a future Science Meets Policy Conference. That's all from me. Over to you now, Valentina. And until we meet again, take care and safe journey home.
Thank you very much, Rose. So just a few words, because I think a lot have been said already, so I don't want to repeat. But before thanking my collaborator, the people that made this event possible, just a few words to say that we started in September 2020 a journey, probably more as a scientific community at that time, speaking about technical issues, putting together some system to share the data. But since September 2020, we have achieved a lot. So we have more or less solved, putting in place some technical solution. And we wanted to bring together all the member states, because this is important to mention, as was said by Frank, that we are not a single country, we are 27 countries, even more, and we have to move at the same pace all together. But then in this year, we realize also the scientific community is not sufficient anymore. There are many other stakeholders that should be on board. And this is why in this event, yesterday we set the scene and we gave background information, but today we wanted to have the other stakeholders, society, industry, legal aspect. So we need, and in the risk managers, without this other stakeholder, we cannot move forward. So we hope to have solved most of the technical issue. Today, we raise some other blockers that we hope in a journey together with all of you to solve in the coming years and arrive maybe at the next conference in 3 years, having new challenges, but having solved the one that we pose in this discussion today. So this is the hope, that we can have a journey together, solving slowly, step by step, all the problem and maybe facing new problems. And what we can say, and was already said by EFSA, we can confirm our commitment to support the countries, the community in moving in this direction. And after this, I would like to thank the people that contributed to this event. First of all, to Rose. Thank you for your excellent moderation, but in particular for guiding the panelists through this zoom-in dimension, this question that we identified. A big thank you to all chairs, speakers, panelists, moderators, because you all did a great job to discuss these relevant points and to contribute importantly to the discussion. Thanks also to the member of the Inter-URL Working Group of the Commission on NGS, because this event was co-organized by EFSA and this Inter-URL Working Group. So thank also for supporting the organization of the event. Also thank to the support, the technical support in EFSA, for the Slido community, all the people that make, from the technical point of view, the event happening. And then I would like to thank in particular the EFSA project staff, because it was a big work, a huge work from Mirko Rossi for the contents and identification of the speakers, Cinzia Percivaldi for the external relations, Alice Cantino and Vanessa Desi for the more logistic and technical support. Last but not least, thank to all participants, both in the room but also online, for your participation, your attention, and posing the question to the speakers. Just to remind you that the recording of the event will be available soon in the EFSA website, together with all presentation. And with this, I would like to close, wishing you all a nice and safe trip back home. And thank you again, and looking forward to the next event in more or less 3 years. Thank you very much to all.